Yup.
Perfect.
All right, welcome to Modern Day Debate. Today we are debating socialism versus capitalism. So we're really excited to have all of our debaters here today. We have, actually, I know everyone, or I've dealt with everyone before in the past, and they're all really, really cool people. So I'm personally really excited to be modding this one. So if you really like debates, we are a channel who hosts tons of debates, so definitely go and subscribe. Also, we really want to thank everyone for being here. I'm going to actually give everyone a chance to kind of introduce themselves. And if you really like any of the speakers or all of them, their links are in the description. So if you want to hear more from them, definitely go and check that out. Brenton, I'm going to start with you. What would people be able to find at your link?
Hey, so I'm Brenton Lengel. I am a playwright, anarchist, and Ringo-nominated comic creator of Snow White Zombie Apocalypse. The Kickstarter for which, by the way, is up right now for issue number 3. We just passed, $12,000. And it's only been up for like 3 days. So guys, if you want to get in on the ground floor on this series, check it out. You'll find it my YouTube channel. You're going to find me vlogging about politics, the state, philosophy, and Buddhism, as well as a lot of debates. So yeah, check that out.
Amazing. All right. NonCompete, what could people find at your link?
Hi, I'm EJ with NonCompete. I do socialist, anarcho-communist videos and live streams. I do also puppet shows in the same vein, which don't get a lot of views, but if you want to see a communist puppet show or an anarchist puppet show, come check them out. And also, currently, the most recent project is I'm working on a trilogy of books with my comrade Luna, who is a Marxist-Leninist here in Vietnam. She's doing a book on dialectical materialism. And Nora, who is actually not a content creator, but just an on-the-ground activist and organizer. She's doing a book on the material conditions in the USA right now. And I'm working on a book on applying leftist theory. So that should be coming out within a couple of months, hopefully. At least one of the 3 books we're not sure which will come out first. But yeah, so look out for those and check out my channel if you want to see more stuff like that.
Amazing. All right. Splinters, what would people be able to find at your link?
Yeah, so as far as my Twitch stream goes, that's where most of my news, politics, and primarily debate content live. I do these kinds of debates as well as debate critiques, where we kind of examine other people's performances and talk about what we can learn from them. And then if you go to YouTube, you'll see that content there as well. But in addition to that, I have some more like media analysis focused stuff. So if you like me here today or any of that sounds interesting, be sure to check that stuff out and come say hi.
Amazing. All right. And finally, but not least, Layman, what can people find at your link?
Yeah, so my name is Layman on YouTube. I'm also on Twitter under that moniker. My content is, there's not really a specific aim to it necessarily. It's just kind of tools that I use in order to just sort of form my thoughts around different topics. And I'll debate different topics, have discussions about different topics. Very, very sparsely, I'll make like a video essay on something. The whole point is really just for me to articulate my thoughts on things and try to, I guess, put that out there so it can be criticized or supported or whatever. And it just leaves an avenue for me to make better sense of the world overall, I guess. And just doing so, you know, sort of acknowledging that like I am a layman, I'm not an expert in any of the things that I talk about. And yeah.
All right, sounds great. So the structure of tonight's debate is going to be 10-minute openings for each of our speakers. Then we're going to go into about an hour of open discussion, followed up by 30 minutes of question and answer. So if you have a question and you want it to be guaranteed to be read, definitely fire it into the super chat and we will read it at the end. So without further ado, we're going to start with the socialist side. Brenton, if you want to start with your opening, and then we'll end with Splinters and Layman.
So the debate tonight is on capitalism versus socialism, and this is a topic that I am really invested in because, as a red-blooded American male, I was raised to love capitalism and hate socialism. And after all, who wouldn't love capitalism? Just look around. One could easily say upon first glance that we in America are living at the absolute pinnacle of human civilization. We elect our leaders rather than having them imposed upon us. We choose our jobs rather than having them chosen for us. Our stores are bursting with more products and food than we can even fully imagine, let alone buy and consume. And it would seem that the only thing standing between us and the American dream is our own willingness or lack thereof to work hard and apply our intelligence and passion in this economic proving ground and make our fortune. And that's what our media tells us, and our textbooks tell us, and our universities tell us, that we're all the scrappy hero fueled by desire and ambition. And if we could just work hard enough and just be smart enough, everything will turn out wonderfully. But of course, a big part of growing up is learning that this is simply not the case. The fact is that despite having all the power and convenience seemingly at our fingertips, people are unfulfilled and alienated, and many in the first world live in a state of extreme poverty and work themselves into an early grave for pennies on the dollar. According to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, as of January 2019, there were at least 567,715 homeless individuals in the United States. And that was before COVID swallowed the nation and cursed us with the worst economy since the Great Depression and caused the worsening of this looming eviction crisis that we are all now facing. Before all of this, 40 million Americans struggled with hunger in the United States, no doubt significantly more now than in 2017, as our economy boomed around us. Still, 15 million Americans lived in food insecure households. It makes almost no difference whether it is a time of plenty or a time of famine. As many as 1 in 6 children in America do not know where their next meal is coming from. And looming over all of this like the sword of Damocles is the seemingly impossible problem of global climate change, the effects of which we are already seeing. War, famine, pestilence, and environmental devastation on a previously unheard of scale. And it's not like there aren't solutions to all these problems. There are 1.5 million empty homes in the United States. That is more than enough for each of the 568,000 homeless people to live in more than one. In fact, we could give 3 or 4 homes to each of them, and we'd still have homes left over. And that's just factoring in housing, and that's just houses, like factoring in apartments and other smaller living spaces. The U.S. Census Bureau estimates that there are well over 17 million vacant properties. Despite our prevalent problems with hunger, Americans waste 40% of the food we produce. We throw away 40 million tons of food a year, and that is a literal metric ton of food per hungry person being wasted. 2,204.62 pounds a year, which factors out to be more than double the daily minimum that a healthy person needs to live comfortably. To return to COVID for a moment, as of yesterday, 253,000 American lives have been sacrificed to this dark god that we call economy. And lest you think that these deaths were unavoidable, I must remind you that in my partner EJ's current home, the country of Vietnam, they have suffered a grand total of 35 deaths to COVID. Not 35,000, 35. As in, of today, only 35 Vietnamese have died of COVID, and only 1,305 have contracted the disease. For comparison, 1,870,428 new cases of COVID were contracted just yesterday, along with just 1,500 deaths. Both numbers will increase tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day, with no relief in sight for the foreseeable future. Now, while this comparison is not apples to apples, as both countries are very different, it is impossible to overlook the fact that one major way in which we differ is that Vietnam is one of the few countries in which profits are not in command of the economy, which then left the Vietnamese with the option of following sensible shutdown and distancing procedures without sacrificing their economy or losing access to necessary services. And let me say that again in case you didn't hear. While the United States and all of Vietnam's immediate neighbors have been crippled by COVID, Vietnam's economy did not suffer from the shutdown and in fact has grown in every quarter. This wasn't a win-lose situation. Vietnam's communism made their weathering of the COVID crisis win-win. Deaths in the low double digits, along with an overall decrease in poverty and an increase in production. We have also failed to act on global climate change, and now we can do nothing but mitigate the damage caused by rising global temperatures. But had the fossil fuel industry not purposefully suppressed the information in the 1970s, and if they were not currently running multi-million-dollar propaganda campaigns to keep the scientific consensus obscured, even as they spend billions shoring up their own infrastructure against climate-induced threats like rising sea levels, Because at the end of the day, even as Exxon spent $31 million on disinformation campaigns aimed at the public, they believed their own scientists, who were in 100% agreement of the threat that human-caused global warming threatened. They knew this decades ago and chose to maliciously lie about it, and were exposed in a leaked memo in 2015. But of course, they faced virtually no consequences for their actions. And similarly, no one is feeding those 40 million Americans, and landlords and banks are actively kicking more people out and onto the streets during an unprecedented global panic. And so I got to thinking, what even is capitalism? Why does everyone tell me it's so great? And if it's so great, why does it allow and perpetuate problems that include, but are in no way limited to, the four that I have quickly listed? And so I did some reading and some searching and some arguing, and I talked to economists and activists and historians, and I came to a definition that I think we can more or less agree upon. Capitalism is an economic and political system that was developed in England in the 17th and 18th centuries, in which the vital industry and resources within a nation are owned by small groups of private individuals and operated for profit. It is characterized by speculative investment by moneyed individuals for the express purpose of turning a profit for those same individuals. This is the capitalist class, a group of wealthy elites who, by virtue of their ownership of land, technology, and resources, earn their living not by the sweat of their brow, but by reaping the benefits of profitable economic activity done by the entities that they own and control. No matter your feelings about capitalism, if you work a job and earn a paycheck, and this paycheck is your primary means of subsistence, you are not a capitalist, you are a worker. Capitalism drives production and innovation by this method of speculative investment. Money is invested, new products are created, and businesses are perpetuated only because the investment keeps coming. If the investors ever slow, stop investing, or withdraw their funds in large enough numbers, the economy crashes, paychecks bounce, and people starve. This is why the United States could not bring itself to respond properly to COVID, because this is what it means to work within an economy where profits are in command. So what has happened here is we have built a system where all of us are essentially beholden to the whims of a tiny overclass of individuals. Worse, this class is not entirely united. They do not act with a single mind or will, and collectively do not have any regard for what they are doing to the world around them. How can they? All they do is take money, invest it, and watch the numbers go up. And when those numbers go down, well, then they freak out and retreat to their bunkers and gated communities and hold on to their remaining dragon's hoard of wealth to wait for a sunnier day. And that is just how capitalism is supposed to work. This doesn't even begin to address corruption, bug exploits, and outright gaming of this system that clever and malicious individuals engage in for their own benefit at the expense of the rest of us, to say nothing of the fact that we have essentially built the financial equivalent of the bus from Speed. Except a bomb will go off not only if the bus drops below 50 miles per hour, but also if Keanu Reeves doesn't infinitely accelerate to avoid that exact same disaster. That is a wonderful premise for a movie, but a terrible and horrifying reality to live in. But there may still be those of you who are asking yourselves, well, why is this bad? Shouldn't the economy expand? Shouldn't people take a risk with their money and be rewarded? Don't we want that behavior? And in a certain very simplistic sense, you're right. But the problem is you're missing the forest for the trees. If our economic and political system is reliant on these individuals to continue to foot the bill and provide the lifeblood that keeps the gears of our industry turning, how can we ever get them to stop or even slow when that is exactly what we need them to do? In moments now, like COVID and global warming, how do we change the course when our own industrial growth turns cancerous and in and of itself becomes the very existential threat to human civilization? The answer is we can't. As I have said, except in rare cases, these investors don't actually see the whole picture. They don't care that Coca-Cola hired mercenaries to murder union leaders in Nicaragua. They didn't care that the British East India Company starved 10% of the entire Indian subcontinent to death within a single year. They didn't care when Leopold II murdered 40 million Congolese, all to acquire a rather large stockpile of rubber and several tons of different kinds of rocks and minerals. They didn't feel bad about American chattel slavery, and they don't feel bad when a clothing factory collapses in Bangladesh, killing thousands, or a Foxconn factory in China drives its workers to suicide while they assemble the iPhones. They don't care that 253,000 of our countrymen have died, 253,000 grandmothers and grandfathers and parents and uncles and aunts, and yes, even children have been taken before their time by COVID. Or if they do decide they care about this, they don't put two and two together and realize that all of this inhumanity is happening just to make the numbers in their computer database go up. Essentially, what we have done, what capitalism does on the macro levels, is it places the levers of power into the hands of people who have nothing to do with the actual source of their income. As such, we must only depend on synergy to make sure that these activities, which make those numbers go up, are actually socially desirable activities. Now, sometimes they are, because synergy is an important principle in nature. And often we find that we are guided towards an end that none of us individually can envision, but all collectively benefit from. But it is not the be-all and end-all of human activity, and allowing people with no real skin in the game to drive the car that is human society is going to wind up running us right off a cliff. We desperately need to move beyond this system. We must break the power of the capitalist class and come together around a better, more sane and compassionate system if we are to survive the next few centuries. We urgently need to solve the riddle of a better way to live for ourselves, for our children, and ultimately our planet. Because if we do not, if human society cannot adapt to a changing world, we will drive ourselves to extinction, and that will be no one's fault but our own. Now, as I continue this debate, I believe that that system that transcends capitalism, that gets us away from the tyranny of profit, is socialism, and can be found in these socialist traditions throughout the world. And we will get into that. But right now, let's deal with the problem in front of us and transcend capitalism as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brenton. NonCompete, if you want to follow up.
Sure. What's my time limit on the intro, just so I can
10
keep track of it?
minutes. 10
Okay,
minutes.
gotcha. Okay. All right. So, yeah, Brenton went through a lot of the data and facts and figures that I would have started with, so I won't bore you with a repeat. But I do want to say that I myself am a former capitalist. I've run about 5 businesses. 2 of them were failures, and 2 of them succeeded, and one of them kind of broke even at the end. So I feel like I've had a pretty broad experience. My biggest company, I had about 15 employees at any given time for most of the tenure of the time that the business was operational. And I'm very well aware, looking back now, of how I exploited my workers. I know exactly what my costs were, what my overhead was, what I charged my clients, and what I paid my employees and my subcontractors. And I know that I pocketed the fruits of my workers' labor. Now, if I had a job where, say, I was charging a client $100, I paid a worker $20, I put in, $20, $30 for the overhead of the business, and I pocketed the rest. Sure, I did some work, okay, to contribute to landing the job, doing some of the sales, doing some of the management or coordination or whatever you want to call it. I did. And so I do feel I deserve some compensation for that. But I took well more than my fair share, especially when it comes to areas of my business which I was running nominally as the capitalist, but which I knew nothing about whatsoever. So for instance, I had an advertising agency and we spun off a web development company, and I really didn't know much about web development at all. I could maybe do like a WordPress page if I had a week or two to fiddle around with it. But I hired a bunch of really sharp, young, recent college grad software developers and web developers and designers who really knew their shit. And they essentially ran that business for me. And that's what capitalists should do if you want to succeed. If you read any book on basic capitalism, they'll say human resources are very important. Hire people who are smarter than you. Make sure that you are able to delegate and hire people that you can trust to delegate to. Okay, these are like basic principles of capitalism. And if anybody, that's one of the things that's interesting about capitalists is that, I say we, since I'm a former capitalist, talk out of both sides of our mouth. So, when we're trying to make capitalism seem great, we talk about how we love to innovate. We talk about how we, have these great ideas that drive the business forward. But when we write books of advice on how to run a business, it's always, hire great people. People are what run your business. I did consulting for human resources for a couple of years, and I learned a lot about how capitalists talk about human resources behind the scenes and how much they do value their labor and how much they do value the ideas that they generate. I know that my web development company, I could never have run that by myself, but I reaped all of the profits from that. And there were times whenever I even made bad decisions and I was like, I'm the boss, I'm the owner, you do what I say. And it backfired because I didn't really know what the hell I was talking about, but I had that arbitrary power and authority over the work lives of my employees. I got to decide basically how they spent their time for most of their waking lives, and it was a very autocratic arrangement. Sure, at the time I felt like I was, a fair boss, and I felt like I was treating them fairly. I felt like I wasn't very restrictive. But the fact of the matter is, I had the power to fire them at any time, especially in South Carolina, which was a right to work state, as they say. So I feel like I'm pretty familiar with the power imbalances of capitalism since I've been on that side of it. I've also worked in corporate environments. I've worked as a freelancer. I've been an Uber driver, and I've been a subcontractor for construction and electrical work with my dad. So I don't know everything, of course, but I've had experience in many areas. And I think my longest tenure of experience is about 10 years as a capitalist. So I do feel like I understand how I exploited my employees. So that said, I want to talk about first the voluntary arrangement of capitalism as capitalogs like to put it. I like to distinguish between capitalogs and capitalists. A capitalist is a person who owns the means of production, who owns a factory or a business or something like that. A capitalog is what I call somebody who just buys into and believes in the idea of capitalism, whether they're a worker or a capitalist. And capitalogs often like to say that this is a voluntary arrangement. I was running my biggest business during the financial crisis of 2007, 2008, 2009. I was getting stacks of resumes every week, and I was throwing them away because I couldn't hire anybody else. My employees had stopped paying, not my employees, my customers had stopped paying me. I had a lot of nonprofit and real estate clients at the time, and a lot of them stopped paying me. So I had to kind of freeze my business. I couldn't grow it for about a year or two. And I was just throwing away stacks of resumes. There were people who were desperate to get a job with me. And I knew that I had employees, specifically those web developers, who wanted to leave my company, but they couldn't find a job anywhere else. And they were basically forced to work for me in my company with frozen wages, even though they desperately deserved raises. But they couldn't, because I wouldn't give them raises, and they couldn't find another job because there was nowhere else to work. It's a very amazingly similar circumstance to what we have now with COVID-19, where we've had over 1,100 wildcat strikes since COVID began, related to things like not getting personal protective equipment, not having paid sick leave, not having sufficient health care to cover somebody if they do get sick, being forced to work at frankly, ridiculous jobs like at Hobby Lobby, through the pandemic, because their bosses wanted to make a profit. And this is this gets to the marrow of my disillusion with capitalism, is the fact that capitalists do have arbitrary power over employees. Look at the economy right now, and you realize that in most states, about 50% of renters are facing eviction right now. Before COVID, 1 in 7 Americans relied on food banks and were food insecure. More people died of malnutrition in the USA by far. 45 times more people died of malnutrition in the USA than Vietnam, twice as many as in Cuba. Those are based on numbers that come from the World Health Organization. So the fact of the matter is, the USA does not provide workers with any sort of social safety net whatsoever. Those numbers, by the way, were all pre-COVID. They're worse now. Food banks are completely overwhelmed right now. You could see miles long backed up lines on the way to food banks in many states and many cities across America. And so in that context, where your choices are to work for a capitalist, like Hobby Lobby, like Taco Bell, like whatever, any business that's making you come into work and risk your life for them, you have that choice to work for them and keep a roof over your head and have food, hopefully have food on your plate. Even though a lot of workers that are making minimum wage have starvation wages, but because remember the 1 in 7 figure for people that are food insecure, a lot of those people do work. They just also don't make enough money to actually put enough food on the table. Regardless, they can either work for this capitalist, or they can go out and face eviction and starve, or become even more at risk for starvation. So it's not a voluntary arrangement for the majority of workers. And especially if you speak globally speaking, and you look at all of the developing and imperialized nations out there, where they really do have the choice of either work or starve, work for a capitalist or starve. I mean, so it's not this voluntary arrangement. I know that as a former capitalist who coerced my workers into working for my company. And I want to also say that there's this other big notion that capitalists deserve their profits because they take a risk. And this completely does not acknowledge the fact that workers take risks. When you get a job somewhere, there is a good chance you might get laid off. Lots of workers have been being laid off throughout this pandemic, as we see. There's also the chance that you could die for your employer. Not just the fact that, all these workers are not getting PPE or paid sick leave or proper protections during work. They're being forced to go out and engage with the public at large, for capitalist profits and risking their lives in that way. But I mean, even before COVID, plenty of workers risked their lives. Pizza delivery drivers are more likely to die on the job than police officers. There are, obviously lumberjacks and long line fishermen and those sorts of jobs. Those people definitely have risked their lives for a very long time. But beyond that, you always have the risk of getting laid off. And one last thing I'll say as a former capitalist, the number one rule of capitalism is you do not start a business being undercapitalized, and you do not start a business without an exit strategy. Every capitalist will tell you this. You don't bet the farm. If you start a business, you better know how you're going to escape if it doesn't go well. And the majority of businesses in the world, even if they do fail, the people who own them are going to come out okay. I did, and I had 2 of my 5 businesses fail, and I came out just fine out of those because I planned it properly to know that if my business did fail, I wasn't going to lose my shirt. And that's what happened. However, most workers who live paycheck to paycheck have about $1,000 in their bank account at any given time, have $6,000 in credit card debt, and make about $30,000 per year. They are not able to sustain a long period of unemployment. So most workers right now are terrified that they're going to lose their job, even though they don't want to be working, as the 1,100 strikes since COVID started demonstrates. And there's no chance for them to start their own business, by the way, as well, because the average startup business in the USA costs about $30,000 to get off the ground. And again, the number one reason that businesses fail in the USA is undercapitalization. So it's a myth that anyone can just go out and start a business. Any capitalist will tell you you have to be very well capitalized to have a good chance of having your business succeed. And it is not a voluntary arrangement. We advocate for democratic control of the workplace. We'll get into that throughout the rest of the debate, but that's the biggest distinction I want to leave this intro with, is that we believe in a democratic workplace, just as we believe in a democratic society. There's no reason for arbitrary power of capitalists over the working class. And I will stop there.
Thank you so much, NonCompete. And then we're going to go on to the capitalist side. I think Layman is going to go next, if that's good with you.
Yeah, certainly. So yeah, today we're here to debate socialism versus capitalism. It's a topic that I personally wrestled with for a very long time throughout my life, given my personal disdain towards materialistic philosophies. I still kind of hold those beliefs today. But when I was younger, of course, I was very, very, predisposed just temperamentally to not like hierarchies. Way back, I used to be a Nosbol adjacent person. A number of years ago, I held all manner of reprehensible philosophical, social, and economic views that I was incredibly incompetent in describing, and I, by and large, kept to myself in fear of looking like an awful person to the world around me, because obviously Nosbols suck. I think we can all agree on that. I no longer hold to a great deal of the sort of anti-capitalist, anti-modernity views that I used to have, but this definitely reinforces my defense of capitalism now at the age of 24. I would consider myself a capitalist, but a reluctant capitalist. So it's important going into this debate, knowing that I'm not a neoliberal, meaning that I'm not a laissez-faire, pro-deregulation kind of guy, where I attribute some kind of like intrinsic value to the private ownership of the means of production because of, more freedom. Rather, I view capitalism as, rather than an intrinsically good system, the best system that we have compared to its alternative aims, whether it's been like I know that fascism, even though whether or not this capitalist's up for debate, but I wouldn't consider it the same thing, where private ownership sort of bleeds into the state to reinforce a sort of dictatorial ruling via forcible suppression of opposition and strong regimentation of society via ultranationalism, or a return to some kind of, monarchical society, which of course is really bad. We can all agree on that. It ended in absolutely catastrophic. It ended horribly. Most of the world was starving to death, and the material conditions were unfathomably wretched for the average person. And of course, whether or not it's the topic of this debate, socialism. So of course, I could use this opportunity to strawman my opponents and try to turn them all into Stalinists, Leninists, Maoists by criticizing vanguard parties and the idea of a transitional state into socialism. But since this has been demonstrated historically to have wretched outcomes, but most socialists that I run to these days, they condemn those societies and their authoritarian aims. So while I'm totally fine with arguing against some tanky shit, for the purposes of this conversation, I'd like to focus specifically on steel manning my opponents, and what Shretton and I hope to do is to argue in favor of private ownership of the means of production, where the economy is facilitated through private property rights, unless in case of an apparent market failure. I don't think anybody would agree, except for maybe ANCAPs, that the military should be privatized. And I think, of course, we're also in favor of, essential healthcare services, universal healthcare, forms of social security, public options for education, et cetera, et cetera. I'm mostly want to focus on this as opposed to worker ownership of the means of production. in which the entire society is essentially run democratically by the workers and private ownership has been abolished either by the state or a worker revolution. Socialists these days often point to the empirical data on worker co-ops that's presently available to argue for socialism. So this is what I'm interested in going after, because not once in any study on worker co-ops will a researcher say in their conclusions, and therefore socialism. So when we actually look into the data in these studies, as solid as it is, I don't think it's an argument for socialism. So my biggest reasons for this are as follows. So private ownership of the means of production is necessary in order to start a worker co-op and for a worker co-op to function in the manner that it does as per the data. So a meta-analysis conducted by Professor Eric Olson at the University of Missouri in 2013 titled "The Relative Survival of Worker Cooperatives and Barriers to Their Creation" finds that the consensus of the existing data is that once created, worker co-ops have survival rates which meet or exceed that of successful traditional business firms. So the traditional like private business, 49% success rate, whereas co-ops, it can go from 60% to even 87%. So that's awesome. And a lot of socialists will use that as an argument for socialism because you think, oh, like worker run versus privately run, amazing. But to quote the researcher, the overwhelming majority of co-ops formed are started out of the pocket of employee owners, no outside investors like a conventional firm. And because of that, worker co-ops are only in areas of industry that are not capital intensive. So all the studies are only on low capital intensive industries. So capital intensive industries, just for the audience, are industries that are measured by how much capital is necessary to put into that given industry. And worker co-ops, as per this meta-analysis, only yield these results for businesses with industries that are low in how capital intensive they are. So Olson points out in the study that with worker co-ops in general, the best way a co-op survives the first 3 years is to have a conventional firm, so a privately run business, transition into a co-op. So it's not a co-op from the beginning. Therefore, private ownership is optimal for both industries that co-ops work well in, so that'd be low intensive industries, and for more capital intensive industries. So some examples of industries that are more capital intensive would be like automobile manufacturing, oil production and refining, steel production, telecommunications, and transportation sectors like railways, airlines, things like that. Some examples of industries that are less capital intensive would be things like financial services and software development. So from what I can tell, there is no evidence that worker co-ops can adequately account for these industries in a manner that they'd be at least demonstrated or we can infer to be a net benefit to society. The second reason why I'm skeptical of the "and therefore socialism" claim is that every study on worker co-ops was done in a society which contains private property rights, where business owners have the voluntary option to pursue either a worker-owned firm or a traditional firm. So that voluntary decision-making greatly influences the data, especially in regards to mental health and well-being, because there are studies on this. As clearly a voluntary action is far different than an involuntary action, as many papers in the field of psychology would affirm. A massive meta-analysis by Professor Douglas Cruz titled "Research Evidence on the Prevalence and Effects of Employee Ownership" of over 70 studies on worker co-ops finds that worker co-ops tend to, and this is a good thing, have higher productivity, more stability, more growth, and better performance and survival when compared to the traditional structure. But the samples for this are in the US primarily, as well as other Western capitalist economies like Italy, the UK, places like that. So it seems like all the meta-analytic data that anybody brings up as it pertains to co-ops will always run into what I described. What I think my opponents need to do to convince me of a socialist position is to provide me with an experiment of which we can actually measure all of these effects provided in the data above in a socialist situation and not a capitalist situation where there is no private ownership of the means of production. And that's what I would need in order to be swayed onto socialism, and I have not seen such an experiment as of yet. And with that, I kick it off to Trenton.
All right. Am I good to go?
You're good to go.
Excellent. I want to begin by talking a bit about how I think we should talk about and think about this debate going forward, before pulling over and expanding upon some of the concepts introduced by my partner in their opening speech. I'll then end by addressing some of the arguments brought up by the affirmative. Firstly, when deciding which sort of economic model best suits our interests, we should understand exactly what those interests are. I contend that those interests are that which will reliably promote the greatest welfare and prosperity for the most people. That is to say, fundamentally, this debate is about what economic model will best make us happy. Given that, there are two absolute truths that we should keep in mind throughout this debate. The first truth is that happiness, satisfaction, and fulfillment are subjective, matters of perception. That said, the best way to ensure a person is prosperous is to let them pursue their own happiness to the greatest extent possible. My contention here is not that we may never restrict the liberty of others, only that doing so is a significant act that ought to demand significant justification. The affirmative position explicitly directly prohibits certain modes of living. If your dream is to take some entrepreneurial vision of yours, realize it, and dictate its course in the world, the affirmative position prevents you from doing so. An explicitly socialist framework says that your vision is not your own and demands that control over that vision be diluted. We ought to set a high bar for that kind of restricting policy. The second truth is that despite its failings, especially in countries that refuse to control for market failures, capitalist systems have, without a doubt, delivered prosperity and welfare to hundreds of millions of people the world over. Perhaps the best iteration of capitalism can be seen in the Nordic model, where strong and resilient private sectors have thrived, such that the state is able to readily tap into that wealth for the purposes of correcting market failures, maintaining strong welfare policies, and further enabling citizens to pursue their own happiness. These countries frequently top the charts of the Human Development Indexes, which seeks to measure progress in those areas most critical to prosperity. This truth is important because it shows us two things. One, many of the apparent flaws of capitalism are not inherent features. Two, the current systems can work rather well, yet the affirmative is asking us to nonetheless throw all of that away. To avoid throwing the baby out with the bathwater, we again ought to demand significant justification from the affirmative. Moving on to some on-case stuff. In keeping with this theme of choice and its relevance in this conversation, I want to touch upon the Olson 13 evidence cited in our first speech. Olson mentions the following. Worker cooperatives in the US are almost always created as new enterprises using funds from worker members themselves. The liability of adolescence experienced by new worker co-ops makes this viable only where the initial capital requirements are low, the expected profit rate is high, or both. Except in circumstances like these, workers are likely to choose conventional employment rather than the uncertain rewards of collective entrepreneurship. One of the as yet unmentioned key takeaways here is that the workers in the status quo choose conventional firms, large in part due to the security they offer in many of these industries. Abolishing conventional firms does not do away with the insecurities faced by worker co-ops. It only removes the secure option for those workers who do not have the luxury or the privilege of risk. If we truly care about the working classes, we ought to offer them meaningful choice, not restrict them to courses of action that are wont to leave them in financial ruin. Further on this point, it's important to remember that worker co-ops are ultimately an exercise in radical group collaboration, and as such demand especially novel group incentive schemes to overcome those problems inherent to collective action. As highlighted in our Cruz and Blasey 95 evidence, such incentive structures may need, quote, something akin to developing a corporate culture that emphasizes company spirit, promotes group cooperation, encourages social enforcement mechanisms. These kinds of group incentive schemes demand individual buy-in on a level unique from conventional firms. We should be seriously skeptical as to how the affirmative expects to get this kind of buy-in from workers who are forced into these modes of collective action, as opposed to being offered the choice to pursue a career with a conventional firm. Next, it is absolutely fundamental that when evaluating the positive effects of worker co-ops, we understand how those positive impacts come about. Cruz and Blasey 95 tell us that the critical metric we should be looking at is perceived influence on the part of employees. When workers believe they have a say, they are more committed, more productive, and more satisfied. Interestingly, what's also made clear in these studies is that worker co-ops, while good at meeting this condition, do not create that perceived influence inherently. Cruz and Blasey find no inherent link between perceived influence and ownership stakes. While this seems counterintuitive at first, this actually makes sense due to what's referred as the 1 divided by n problem. As more employees are hired, the stakeholder pool expands and individual influence within the corporation is diluted. Anyone who's voted in an especially populous district knows this problem. Besides showing us that worker co-ops don't de facto access their primary positive impact, this tells us that those positive traits are not exclusive to worker co-ops. There's no reason conventional firms can't create perceived influence among their employees. Anyone who's worked in management knows that the best firms go out of their way to ensure that their employees feel as though their voice matters. In-house focus groups can be made, surveys with transparent and prompt feedback, open forum board meetings. There are a plethora of ways for conventional firms to access these same positive impacts we associate with worker co-ops by making sure their employees feel heard. Finally, my partner cited Olson 13 as evidence for the utility conventional firms provide to worker co-ops as a means for mitigating the risks associated with the latter. I want to address any concerns regarding the likelihood of conventional firms willingly making that transition to a worker co-op, because it does seem kind of hard to understand. Both Olson 13 and Cruz and Blasey 95 reference current tax incentives that in the status quo have led to a significant increase in companies that feature employee stock ownership plans. This shows us that through intelligent policymaking, we have the tools to ensure some degree of increased worker ownership in conventional firms. And there's no reason to believe that we can't hyper-target these same tax incentives to successfully encourage the transition of conventional firms to worker co-ops. This is important because it offers us a scenario where even if we believe worker co-ops are fundamentally preferable to conventional firms, the best way to ensure the creation and longevity of those co-ops is to maintain private firms and bend them to our interests. And this is not possible if we abolish private capital and move to a socialist economic model. Now I'm going to use the last 2.5 minutes I have, hopefully it won't take that long, to just quick do a line by line and address some of the concerns brought up by the socialist position so far. So with regard to Brenton's speech, a lot of the complaints that were brought up here are not complaints that are inherent to capitalism. The flaws and problems are real, but if you can draw a clear causal line between problem ABC and capitalism to the economic model, that's really important and that needs to be explicitly done. I would love to see a citation for that. And I think that we best kind of see where this might not be possible in something like COVID. Plenty of thoroughly capitalist nations absolutely killed it with their COVID response. So the idea that we can point to things like COVID or even things like unemployment and homelessness and a lot of these social problems we see today in America and say that these are causal inherent consequences of capitalism seems very strange to me, especially considering that we can look at other capitalist countries that seem to have addressed these problems far better. It seems to me like a lot of the criticisms here are policy problems. They are consequences of poor governance and failing policymakers, not any sort of problem inherent to the economic model that is capitalism. And I continuing on the COVID point, to kind of illustrate even how this would manifest in America, I think it is blatantly obvious to most people, I would hope, that are anywhere near, have been keeping up with news cycles, that if Trump and McConnell were not in power, then the American COVID response would have been radically different, right? We had the experts, even the economists. I know that it was mentioned that in America, the profit motive means that, oh, well, we're not going to take the steps necessary to deal with things like COVID. But even economists were pretty unanimously saying, you have to take these lockdown actions. You have to start testing and doing contact tracing, because in the long term, if we don't take actions, the consequences to our economy are going to be worse. So this idea that the profit motive pollutes our ability to respond to crises doesn't seem to bear out. And the last thing I want to say is in response to American Johnson, when we talk about the power dynamics between employers and employees, we should remember that there are plenty of ways to mitigate that through things like ESOPs or through strong unions that are perfectly compatible with capitalist frameworks. And I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Splinters. And now we'll go ahead. That's a good segue into our open discussion.
All right. There's a lot to dig into here. I want to thank both of my opponents here. I want to point a couple of things out first off. And there was a bunch that I wanted to address, but the capitalists have done as well as Vietnam. Show me one capitalist country that has anything close to Vietnam's results.
Vietnam.
Yeah, he's right, actually.
Vietnam is not capitalist. They've had some capitalist reforms over the last however many years, but Vietnam is still a socialist nation, and EJ can go into that.
So I live in Vietnam, and I've actually lived through the COVID response here. And I'll say any of the countries that did do well, including capitalist nations, which I would agree are capitalist, like South Korea actually didn't do nearly as well as Vietnam, but I would say that New Zealand and Taiwan, pretty close. Actually,
I would throw Australia in there too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Australia did not do nearly as well as Vietnam. Yeah. But anyway, the point I'm going to make is that the countries that did well in their responses are the countries that enacted socialistic policies that put human lives before capitalist profits. Okay, yeah. So this is the deal that I think Brenton is trying to explain when he says that it's socialism that aided the response in Vietnam. It's that socialistic policies such as, and I was living through this whole thing, I can attest to the fact that they shut down every non-essential business. And when I say non-essential in Da Nang, I mean, they shut down restaurants. You couldn't even get food delivery from restaurants. The only places that were open were markets and grocery stores. You had to get a temperature scan when you came in. They would only let people go to the traditional markets 5 times per family per week. So they had very severe restrictions on capitalist profits. And yes, the tourism industry in Vietnam is dead right now as far as foreigners coming in. The only tourism right now is domestic. And it does, of course, hurt capitalist profits a lot. However, Vietnam has been able to weather the storm through socialistic policies. They have provided absolutely free testing and healthcare to everybody during the crisis, including foreigners. They've provided free and mandatory quarantine to anybody who may have been exposed. They've had great tracking and tracing programs. It is these same protocols, these same styles of protocols were used in New Zealand and Taiwan, and that's why they are still doing very well as well. Anywhere you see success against COVID, it's because capitalist profits were not guiding the economy, and they were not guiding the response in the political angle as well. The doctors and the people who actually know how to fight a crisis like this were put in charge and allowed to put the interests of human life and saving human life ahead of capitalist profits. And you see that even the wonderful Nordic model countries that you're talking about did much, much, much worse than
Sweden tried to use what was it called, herd immunity, which doesn't even work because you can get COVID twice. Right. They had a bunch of people die for no good reason whatsoever. Now, I will also point out that even in the case of Taiwan and New Zealand, they had a better response, and they saved lives, but their economies tanked, whereas the Vietnamese economy grew in all of the quarters. Again, it's win-win, because when you have an economy that is not tied to profits, that can still grow even if profits and speculative investment goes down, you can weather crises like COVID. You can do something about global warming.
Vietnam has long-standing socialist programs that predate COVID by far, such as price control programs, which make things like, so one of the first things Vietnam did when COVID started was they shut down rice production. Big deal for Vietnam, because one of Vietnam's biggest exports is rice. They're, I think, the second largest rice exporter in the entire world. It's a big deal for them to shut down rice exports. That's the first thing they did. They've always had price controls on food staples. Food prices were totally 100% stable. There was never a shortage. There was like one small run on grocery stores for a couple of hours until the government started providing free food to anybody who was under quarantine and showed that they were going to support human life regardless of what happened. That run in the grocery stores lasted about 2 or 3 hours until they saw that policy come out, and that ended immediately. We never had any kinds of shortages the whole time I've been here, and that's because from before COVID, these kinds of programs have been in place, and healthcare has been available. 90% of Vietnamese people are fully insured. 90% of Vietnamese people own their own homes, so they haven't had to worry about paying rent through the crisis.
Which is huge.
So,
We've got an eviction crisis because so many people rent.
plus a massive number of workers' co-ops in Vietnam, especially agricultural workers' co-ops. So the vast majority of agriculture in Vietnam is worker-owned cooperatives, and worker-owned cooperatives are also one of the many wonderful qualities we've been talking about of worker co-ops. One of them is that during a crisis, they're more likely to everybody agree to kind of reduce their wages instead of fire people. And that's exactly what we saw in Vietnam. So a lot fewer farm jobs were lost in Vietnam because of the resiliency of workers' co-ops compared to other places in Southeast Asia, which had a lot more layoffs and that sort of thing for farm labor. So I do have to say that from my experience, having lived through this crisis, having studied it a lot in terms of what Vietnam's response has been, it is socialistic policies. Even if you don't think that Vietnam itself is a socialist country, or New Zealand and Taiwan obviously are not socialist countries in terms of having workers on the means of production, they still had policies that did not allow capitalist profit motivations to guide society. And the last sentence I'll make is this. And a wider point is one of the biggest problems I have with capitalism is simply that it allows all of human society to be harnessed to capitalist profit motivations. It doesn't do great things for things like the environment. Even the best deal we've seen, like the Green New Deal, which has been signed off by some capitalists, it doesn't go nearly far enough in terms of stopping global climate change in time to avoid complete climate catastrophe. So we have to find better solutions to these problems that we're facing in the very near term future.
Can I jump in with a couple points real quick?
Sure, yeah, go for it, Trenton. Go for it.
Yeah. So there's like a lot there. So I'm gonna go line by line just to put like something on each of them, but we can like drill in on whatever one we find the most interesting. So one thing that keeps happening here that I do not understand is, why is it that when we point to the reasons why countries like Vietnam handled this crisis better or more resilient through it, when we actually look at the policies that allowed that to happen, none of these policies are in any way like tied to a specific economic model. We talk about the profit
they are
motive,
tied, but they're incentivized by the specific.
The economic model puts society at the behest of capitalist profit motives. That's why the USA had no shutdown, because capitalists completely run society.
We're gonna let Splinters just go ahead and finish.
Okay, sorry.
No, go ahead, and then.
Sure. So, yeah, I was gonna try and address that too. So we can say that, well, the putting profits first is, why these countries were incapable of like responding in the way they should have. But the two or three issues I have with that are that, like, one, we can go and we can look at major economic opinion, like the economic discourse among economists that are cited and ostensibly should be turned to when it comes to dictating American policy. And the pretty overwhelming consensus is that, hey, we need to take action now. It's better to hurt ourselves in the short term with like lockdowns and whatnot, rather than allow this virus to run rampant throughout our country for the next year and a half. Or additionally, you don't even have to talk about these lockdowns and our inability or unwillingness to do so if we had adequate testing and contact tracing from the get-go after borders were closed. And that didn't happen 100% purely only because Donald Trump and Republicans in positions of power decided that they didn't want to do anything about it. There's no profit involved there. The government has the means, it has the funding to go out and to get people at airports and at the border, testing people and contact tracing those who test positive. There's no profit motive that even comes into play here. The only way I could see these decisions being tied to back to the economic model is if, and Brenton kind of alluded to this, is if there's something about the economic model of socialism that inherently just places more value on human life, which sounds like you guys are implying, but you need to draw that distinction. I don't have to
demonstrate that.
Yes, you need to demonstrate that. And I don't see how that is inherent in socialism. I see no reason why worker co-ops can't/aren't in the now also driven by profit motives in their respective economies. I guess there's some other stuff, but we can dive on that first.
No, that's good, because I would like to drill into that. And this was where I wanted to go anyway, so thank you for bringing that up. Okay, so here's the issue. There wasn't a profit motive directly, and you're right in the sense that like economists were saying, no, we have to shut down now or it will be worse in the long run. But that's the thing about capitalism. It can't think long term like that. What's happening is that our industry is being driven by this class of investors, by the people who put their money into Wall Street. And what happened was that the people who had the incentive, who had the ability to make those important policy decisions that would preserve human life and actually preserve the economy in the long run, had no good incentive to do that, especially since they knew they were coming up on an election and they knew they would get voted out if the economy was bad. So what they wound up doing essentially was the worst of both worlds. They crashed the economy and then they put us into a uniquely bad situation. So yes, our leadership in the United States, well, no, not just in the United States. We've seen this in just about every country in Europe. And the fact is that, again, the COVID response has been garbage. It's uniquely garbage in the United States. But I would also argue that the leadership that we have in the United States is a direct result of capitalism and the profit motive, specifically Donald Trump. Because Donald Trump made a lot of money while he was on television, not for himself because he's a terrible businessman, but he made a lot of money for the networks that they continuously covered him because he said a number of horrible things. And as the media zoomed in on him and gave him billions and billions of dollars of free coverage, he just got more and more popular. And bam, you have a freaking psychopath in the White House with holes in his brain.
Well, yeah, but also Biden has already said that he's going to veto universal health care if it comes across his desk. He's not going to have shutdowns. He's not going to shut down the economy. He's going to shut down the virus, is what he says. Yeah, he hasn't given anything in his plan that indicates he's going to do anything that will meaningfully contain COVID. So I don't think this is just a Trump problem. And I also don't think it's just a USA problem. I think that the burden of evidence is really very much on the pro-capitalist side here, in terms of looking at the whole planet and seeing that the overwhelming vast majority of countries with capitalist economies, which is the overwhelmingly vast majority of countries, have done a very, very bad job. And it's absurdly naive to me to say that, capitalist profit motives and capitalist interests don't dominate the politics in these countries. I mean, if you just look at the USA alone, the way that lobbying works, the way that bills get written, the way that all of our non-corporate advisors have been gutted back when Newt Gingrich defunded the Senate and House. So they got rid of all of the advisors and replaced them with lobbyists. I mean, if you know anything about how the system works in the USA, you know that capitalist interests have dominating power over, and you can look at it in the way that in the outcomes of legislation as well. You know that wealthy people have much more impact on legislation and on politicians than working class people. So I really do think the burden of evidence here is on the opposing side to show that capitalism can handle COVID, because overwhelmingly it did not. And in the cases where it did, it was only where they had strong policies that did not allow capitalist interests, because capitalists want to keep their businesses running. Okay, they don't want to shut down their businesses. They don't want to pay their employees extra money for paid. They don't want to invest in PPE. They proved that. They demonstrated it very, very, very soundly during the non-response that we had. And
even if they're nice and they wanted to actually do that, they are economically disincentivized to do it by the system that we have. We punish them for helping their employees in much the same way. And again, all of this goes down to that problem of putting profits first economically. It doesn't necessarily mean that our leaders are people who sit there and rub their hands together and say, ha, 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 how many people can I kill today to become wealthy? Very few people are like that. I mean, Leopold II of Belgium was like that. But, besides that, like that's rarely happens. It's like capitalism, it's like it's an algorithm that is set to select leaders within our society, and the algorithm has been set to select the cleverest and most amoral people and to elevate them.
I need to correct one quick thing. I want to get Layman to
go for it.
Real quick, because it's a talking point I hear all the time, and it's super out of context and not true. The whole Biden said he was going to veto healthcare. That entire quote, he explicitly said he would veto healthcare if Democrats put it across his desk without any funding attached to it. That is very different from Biden is not going to pass universal health care. Okay,
I mean,
go ahead.
He campaigned against univeral health care. He
specifically I think we should really just stick on. Let's just focus on the capitalism, socialism part of the.
Don't go yelling about Biden. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
My whole point was just that I don't think Biden would do a better job than Trump. Meaningful.
I would agree. In fact, I might even say that if Hillary had won in 2016, we might not have gotten the. Now, this is speculation on my part, but the actual bailout, I think, might not have happened. I would be very surprised to see the bailout that came to the American people come through anybody. The only reason Trump did it was he just does whatever, and they thought it would be popular.
All right, take it away, Layman.
Yeah. I just wanted to say, I just think there are so many points that were just said that I don't think I could possibly respond.
Yeah. Did not mean to gish gallop, but yeah, choose whatever you want to focus on. I mean, yeah.
Well, okay. So there was something that came up a very, very long time ago, where we're pointing to like Vietnam as like a socialist society. So first of all, like, I don't know how you measure whether or not a society is a socialist society outside of like the worker co-op model. And I looked into this. Out of the like 500,000-ish businesses in Vietnam, only like 25K of them are worker co-ops. It's less than 1% of businesses are worker co-ops. It doesn't really seem like much of a socialist society to me. Plus, like, from what I understand too, like there's still like some kind of like private health insurance in Vietnam. Like they cover the absolute poorest 100%, and then like 80% for like the average like middle class person, then 30% for like farmers and fishermen. So it doesn't seem like a socialist society to me. So it's weird that we would go to this as an example.
The workers co-op numbers are off quite significantly. There are millions of workers that work for co-ops in Vietnam. I'll get the exact number in a second here. But as far as the way the insurance is structured, yeah, I don't think it's ideal, but it is. It's a lot better than what they have in the USA, at least, which is a very, very low bar. But yeah,
my point is that it's not socialism.
90% of Vietnamese people are fully insured, though, is I think what's important.
I mean, it is socialism in the sense that, for one thing, what I've said is profits are not in command of the economy. The economy is not structured around a way that the only way that it grows is through speculative investment for profit.
It feels like now we're changing the definition of socialism to something that we didn't agree upon.
I'll grant you the point. At least for me, I can't speak for Brenton, but for me, Vietnam is not the ideal society, and it's not the kind of society that I would want.
No, I'd agree.
That's not. It's perhaps the best we have right now. In my experience, it's the best place I've lived in terms of having more socialism versus more capitalism influencing society. But no, I think that you need to completely eliminate capital and build workers need to own the means of production within a socialist society, which is why I think. Just to go back to the point, maybe this is a good thing for us to focus on for a bit, because I think this gets you're not allowed to have independent unions in Vietnam, to my knowledge. There's like one legal state-led like trade union. It's a one-party socialist republic. It doesn't seem like 90% of worker strikes in Vietnam are done outside of the official union. They're wildcat strikes, and there's never been an instance of Vietnam's government punishing people for having those wildcat strikes. So in the USA, all workers unions also need to be registered with the Board of Labor. So, I mean, if you want to do a comparison, it's pretty much a standard practice for unions to have to register with governments. I'm an anarchist, so I'm opposed to the state. So I don't think that's great. So I'm not going to sit here and say that that's the best system. But I will say that fact that 90% of strikes in Vietnam are wildcat strikes and that are not punished by the government, I think that would say that there is some worker organization that doesn't seem like
this.
You're looking at the paper, but I'm looking at what's actually happening in practice. So on paper, yes,
personal experiences aren't an argument.
Associated.
Well, it's not just personal experience.
No, 90%. You look it up. 90% of strikes in Vietnam are wildcat strikes that go outside of the official union structure. Yeah, I mean, so there is worker organization here that is not affiliated with the state.
But regardless, my point though is that this doesn't seem like a socialist society with the definition that we agreed upon, which is worker ownership of the means of production. There's like,
right, okay, well, I'm not arguing that Vietnam is the best society. I'm arguing
I'm not saying it's fully point. Give him a second. Let him finish his point.
I'm not saying that you think it's the best society. That's not the point that I'm making. The point that I'm making is that it's
I just found out that last year, by the way, I just want to interject this. Last year, Vietnam passed a law that you can have independent unions. Okay.
Oh, they did? Okay, well, that's cool. Awesome. Regardless, I mean, my point is that it's not a society where the workers collectively own the means of production.
No,
like we agreed upon.
Society I'm arguing for.
I mean, we could say, okay, so this is, again, when we're working with real world examples of like what is a socialist society and what is not, and what can we judge to be more significantly socialist than others, Vietnam is the most socialist society that we can probably point to, or among the most
maybe Cuba
societies. Yeah.
Cuba I just want to say I don't like the framing here, and I think it's unfair that we're sitting here having to say that defend Vietnam when as you're saying, it's not a purely socialist society. We're advocating for a purely socialist society, and there's not this expectation that the capitalists have to, like America, like the USA or Norway. Norway has plenty of problems. And Norway, by the way, the big Norway and Sweden, these Nordic model countries, they export their suffering through international imperialist capitalism. And if you just look at during the COVID response there, Sweden's IKEA factories had horrible, atrocious working conditions. Look at the factory for IKEA in Russia. It was one of the worst outbreaks at the beginning, and IKEA's corporate structure did absolutely nothing to help their migrant workers that lived there. So the fact that these Nordic models might look great on paper just means that they're exporting their suffering to factory nations. And I'd love to see how well they do if they don't have those factory nations to produce everything for them. If you only care about the workers in your own country and you don't care about the people that are suffering in the countries that make the shit that you buy and use, then I find that to be, I don't know, not a very strong position.
Terrifyingly short-sighted.
Yeah, so this is actually like a really interesting point, right? Because when we talk about like exporting like suffering, as far as like having exporting the manufacturing of a lot of these goods to like other countries, we like to, when we have this conversation, it often does come up this point that you brought up where, you know, the conditions that these people are working in are like terrible and whatnot. So something I think that's important to remember, as unfortunate as it is that absent, you know, if for example, if America practiced a much more protectionist trade policy, then that manufacturing would be taking place here. That does not mean that the workers, like these children in like Chinese sweatshops or something, are now, you know, in these like beautiful like luxury jobs. That just means that they're, instead of working, you know, in a sweatshop, they are working in a field for less pay in worse conditions, right?
Well, hang on. There's
a second part to this. There's a second part to this that I want to get to, right? And then feel free to tear it all apart. So like, I think it's important to remember that like these free trade deals like happen for a reason, and that oftentimes the way this cycle works is it kind of passes the buck, where less developed nations oftentimes act as the manufacturing basis for more developed nations, and that leads to an increase in average wealth and income for those people. And as people's income and wealth increases, they get more negotiating power. They're able to argue for better labor protections, and then that makes the cost of labor there more
Are you
expensive,
using the IMF's?
And it kind of it goes around.
This is the Steven Pinker bull crap.
Are you using the international poverty line from the IMF
for
get those numbers?
For which
the World Bank? I'm sorry, the World Bank international poverty line. Is that what you're basing that lifting people out of poverty stuff on?
Are you asking for like which numbers? I guess am I? I'm not
because I don't believe I have data that conflicts with the idea that capitalism lifts people in imperialized or what, as you say, developing countries out of poverty. I don't think that that's true at all. And I
sure,
could share numbers.
if you can like drop that in chat or something, I'd love to look it over. The second part of that I wanted to mention is that one of the other nice things about this is that when we export our manufacturing through these trade deals, that actually allows us to be in a position to negotiate for better labor protections for those people. That's something that Obama in America was doing under the TPP before everybody lost their mind on it and pulled out. So like, we kind of can use this interdependency.
Do you think the USA is a great platform for enacting global change? I mean, what the track record?
Absolutely, we have so much hegemony.
we
have so much power, and we have.
Yeah, but look at what we do with it.
We
bomb hospitals. We don't improve labor conditions for people.
We propped up a freaking fascist government in Chile.
Labor conditions were in the TPP. We negotiated the Paris Climate. Of course, we negotiated the Iran deal. We use our hegemony for good things all the time.
So you're just arguing for imperialism.
Yeah.
And when it gets undone, it's not because of capitalism. It's because bad people get put in office.
But capitalism puts those bad people in office because it rewards the exact kind of bad people.
I have a question about that.
I think we kind of... Okay, go on.
Is the argument here that... So is the response here that anytime that I point to a policymaker making a bad decision, that is still evidence of capitalism failing because policymakers only get in office off the back of support from capitalists?
No. The issue is that capitalist businesses are treated as a proving ground. They're treated as a way to select our leaders and ways to. It's an intelligence system. Essentially, that's how markets work. The problem is a couple of things. One, markets are inherently biased towards previous actors within those markets, which is why, for instance, swarm technology was able to outperform both experts and markets, the markets being the Vegas odds, and properly predict the winner of the Kentucky Derby. And you guys can look that up. It's freaking fascinating because it's a way of aggregating human intelligence in such a way that the people become smarter than the sum of their parts. And I actually think this could be really heavily used in a future socialist society. But the point being is that, first of all, you've got the snowball effect of power. As you are successful within the market, you gain more power and you gain a higher profile. And eventually you get up to the point where you can run for office successfully and win, usually. Now, there are other ways to do this. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, great example, and I actually met her in New York City before she was famous. She was my bartender and we talked about Occupy. She's super smart. But that's rare. The point is that overall, the system will select for, like, as if it were an algorithm, like, how YouTube has the algorithm that selects the specific videos that are then delivered to people. And similarly, the capitalist algorithm selects specific people and puts them into positions of power. And what it uses to select for those people is oftentimes a high degree of amorality. And usually, not always, because Donald Trump is not a clever individual, but usually they tend to be very clever and smart. So basically, it's like you took an algorithm and you said, I want to give power to people that don't care about ethics, and I want to give power to people that that are really, really smart. This is going to work out great. And boom, you run into situations where, for instance, psychopaths make up maybe 1% of the US population, but 10% of Wall Street. And similarly,
Wall Street is not U.S. policymakers.
Yes, it is. That's the point.
Hold on. I don't like this framing again.
Yes.
This framing is that, like, we need to have, like, this imperialist relationship with other countries so that the U.S. state hegemony can go out and
I don't think
and influence labor. But the factories that are being owned by companies like Foxconn, they're being commissioned by companies like Apple. They're being owned by capitalists. If capitalism is so great, why don't the capitalists improve the workers' conditions? Yeah. I don't think people will be jumping off of buildings if they own their own labor and they collectively own those factories themselves. So why is it like this complex liberal imperialist structure where we have to, which never happens. There's this whole NGO industrial complex that says that they're doing all this work, but it doesn't happen. People are not being lifted out of poverty. They are jumping off of the rooftops of buildings that are tied directly to American capitalists that don't do anything to improve those workers' conditions. If capitalism is so great and it's so great for one person to own this massive, or one small group of shareholders to own this massive corporation, why don't they improve the working conditions for their own workers? Why do we need this big, complicated imperialist machine? Why don't the capitalists just make good working conditions for their own workers if that's the greatest structure for how to structure a business entity? It's a weird framing to me.
The issue with Wall Street, by the way.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
There is a question, so I just want to give Splinters and Layman a chance to respond to that.
All you, Layman.
And then we'll get right back to you.
Yeah, I don't think it's fair to, like, sort of straw man us to being like, oh, we're like pro this whole ruling elite that wants people, that's like okay with people dying and stuff. Like, I don't think Trenton and I.
So how do you have capitalism without that? Without 8 people owning 50% of the wealth? Like, give me your vision for ideal
50% of the wealth. I don't know. Taxes. And then you put those taxes back into social programs.
How do you make that happen?
How do you make that happen? Through policies that have been done in many countries.
Yeah, but when you are
Layman,
successful as a businessman,
the problem here is that they're, and I think as Brenton showed us, that they seem to believe that, like, the private world, like some algorithm in the private world selects for all U.S. policymakers and not like U.S. electoralism.
It's not.
It's not the case at all.
No, seriously. The United States is not a democracy. Too, right? It's an oligarchy. It's been rated as that, specifically. And the interests of politicians and the wealthy are weighted far more than the interests of the voter.
Okay, but we're talking about. But there's other capitalist countries that you can point to, right? Like, we're not like, I don't think Trent and I are like stands of the USA. Like,
sure, but all the other capitalist countries have the same problem in that they concentrate a great deal of power and control and the ability to rewrite the rules and to change policy in the hands of very few people. And the more these people are removed from society and the more they are raised to the highest levels of power, the more disconnected they become from the rest of society. And even if they aren't evil, they just don't understand. And as a result, horrible things happen. And great example. Do you think that everyone who invested in the British East India Company was a monster, that if they'd gone to India and they'd seen 10% of the subcontinent dying in a single year as a direct result, do you think that they would have continued to support that? No, but they didn't. They were removed from the situation.
Yeah, I just don't know anything about the East India Company, so I can't really
Dude.
speak to that. But
Yeah, look up. It's called the Age of It's called the Age of Heroic Commerce. There's a great podcast if you don't want to read the book.
Okay, my problem is that like we're attributing like all of these problems to capitalism, right? But I'm hearing a lot of capitalism is bad, but I'm not hearing a lot of socialism is a good prescription. And then if socialism solves all of these problems, going back to what I said earlier, like I need an experiment of a worker-owned society.
How can we make it? That's not an argument. Experiment. I'm sorry, but the fact of the matter is, you're saying like a lot of your arguments against worker co-ops.
I wasn't trying to make an argument. I was just asking for like an experiment. That's all.
No,
like you shared all the numbers about workers cooperatives that show how great they are.
Yes, but as we said before, like these are co-ops that have to start privately owned, and then that
within a capitalist society, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Right. So, but that's
what all the data is on. Now,
literally every single socialist, anarchist, Marxist, they all say that socialism must grow out of capitalism. You can't spring into socialism from nowhere. The point is we expropriate these factories.
Can I jump in for like 2 seconds?
Yeah, go for it, Brenton.
So, like, Brenton, I totally understand how goddamn infuriating it is where we're sitting here asking like, give us the experiment, and we all know that like the perfect socialist like countries never existed, right? So this is like very, very, very difficult for you.
Perfect country period hasn't existed,
right?
This
exactly
is early in the development.
I don't want a perfect country,
but like you have to understand, and I try to get at this in my like framework argument in my opener, that when we look at something, and I suppose we would disagree on this, but at least for us capitalists, right? For us capitalists, we look at the world and it seems like capitalism, despite its failings, especially in certain iterations, like the American iteration, it seems to have worked relatively well compared to alternatives that have been tried. So if you are trying to tell us to like, listen, you need to abandon this, we have a better option, like, man, there's like a high bar to like convince capitalists of that change that I feel like has to be met.
Existential threat to the human race.
I have 2 points. These are questions that I would like to have answered by the opposition. So because I think we have talked a lot, and I think it's fair. But I have questions that I'd like answered. So first of all, these experiments that you want to exist to show that socialism works, why doesn't capitalism allow them to take place? Why, when Vietnam decided they wanted to become socialist and the overwhelming number of Vietnamese people supported Ho Chi Minh, why did the Americans come in and support a puppet government that guillotined thousands of people, had a very fascistic rule over South Vietnam? Why, when Allende was legally and democratically elected into office in Chile, did the USA install Pinochet to become a ruthless fascist dictator there? Why does the CIA coup countries around the world whenever they start to dabble in socialism? Why do we put these severe embargo restrictions on places like Cuba and Vietnam? Why don't you just allow these experiments to flourish? And the reason is because they're afraid that they might succeed. And they're afraid that like when Allende was in power, he was succeeding and making Chile a much better country, which Pinochet immediately rolled all that back with the Chicago Boys and that neoliberal hegemony that came from liberals in the USA. So why don't those experiments, why aren't they allowed to flourish under capitalism with this capitalist hegemony around the world? And my second question is, can you show me a capitalist country that works? Can you show me a capitalist country that works for everybody in the supply chain? Okay, so even in the Nordic country, they severely oppress people in their factory nations. So I would like to see your experiment where capitalism benefits everybody in society, everybody is taken care of, everybody has their material needs met. I think that same experiment, you have the same burden of evidence for the experiment, if that's such an important.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, like when I'm asking for an experiment, I'm not asking for it to be like a perfect 100%, every single thing is accounted for, everybody
No, I know,
is
but
like
there hasn't
happy.
even been a chance because of the way that...
No, I know. So, well, I mean, I can only go off of what the data presents me, right? Like, I don't like to make very vague inferences to like, well, it might be this, it might be this. When I'm looking at the data on worker co-ops, the success rates from them come from not them starting as worker co-ops from the get-go, but from them transitioning into them after they register as a private traditional firm first. And that's why I'm sort of skeptical of this. And I think that might be why some, for example, like I hear a claim a lot from people like Richard Wolff, where banks sort of have a sort of bias towards like a private ownership versus worker ownership for like ideological reasons.
It's investors too.
Yeah. So like going back to the data, I think that's because the data seems to suggest that it's better if they start off as that and then transition into it versus them starting off right away. So if you wanted to start a business, you could start a business, but then transition into a co-op later. And I think that
as a former capitalist.
Well, I think that
sorry.
might.
I thought you finished.
Yeah, I'm just saying. I think that might be a potential explanation why. That's at least backed by data. That's as much as I can know. And I just want to clarify once again, I don't intrinsically defend private ownership. Like, obviously, I'm in favor of some forms of decommodification here and there if we can demonstrate that it's good. I'm not a researcher. Like, I can't go in and implement these models. I'm not a policymaker. Like, I'm just an average guy. So, like, I just have to go off of this as well. So. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like answer question 1. And this is, I don't want to take us down an electoralism rabbit hole, but as you asked, why has the U.S. engaged in all of these? I would agree, like pretty bad foreign interventions. Yeah. Like the unironic answer to that is that the U.S. voting population is small and uniquely uninformed and apathetic towards foreign policy, and we do not evaluate our policymakers and public office candidates based on their beliefs about foreign policy. That is the reason why this stuff happens. It's because these people don't get held accountable.
And why are they like that?
For a myriad of reasons.
Because
most predominantly probably
because
the education system is like woefully underfunded in the United States.
Yeah, and why is it woefully underfunded?
Because
the U.S. education system,
it's a feedback cycle.
Exactly. It's a negative feedback cycle. So what you've got essentially here is the U.S. is uniquely a garbage fire in this regard, because the nitwits with wooden teeth who thought bloodletting would cure them were the ones that built our system, and they were deeply afraid of people having real power. These were a bunch of rich idiots who came from England, the aristocrats that wanted to be the new nobility in the new world. Those are the people that created our hallowed constitution. They created the state religion that we all have to live in called capitalism. And, capitalism predated that, but I'm talking specifically about like American society and how it relates to capitalism and economics. So you've got stuff like, for instance, people in the United States, not voting very particularly well or being particularly intelligent or being particularly educated, but that is by design. Because again, the people that actually hold the levers of power don't want us to be educated. They don't want us to be able to think critically. Noam Chomsky talks about this. If you watch Manufacturing Consent, they actually view Americans taking democratic, like masses of Americans voting, they view that as a crisis of democracy because they think we're all idiots and that they're the only ones that can run this.
I don't even necessarily disagree with that. The problem is that you can't draw this disenfranchisement by design talking points. You cannot connect these to the economic model of capitalism when we have capitalist nations that have gone out of their way to enfranchise their voting population. Right?
I'm sorry.
We can go look at mandated voting in Australia, right? We can look at capitalist nations that go out of their way to enfranchise their population, that go out of their way to educate their population, that top the charts in terms of
certainly. And again, I'm saying the United States is in a uniquely garbage position here. But these problems are still inherent in Australia. They're still inherent in any of these capitalist nations, because what they do is the system winds up, because markets are biased towards previous actors within markets, it tends to bring the power to a specific pinnacle of a few, 100 or 100.
I think I have a more simple, I think I could cut closer to the quick here maybe, because the economic model of capitalist owning production is the model under which these workers are being treated like shit. The capitalists are the one treating the workers like shit. I don't understand. Like, we don't have to build a big justification for the electoral problem, blah, blah, blah. The capitalists treat their workers like shit. That's what's happening. I mean, the people are jumping off the buildings because the capitalists who own the companies are treating them like shit. So why do we have to go through and prove all this stuff about electoralism and all this stuff whenever, quite frankly, if the capitalists owning the means of production is great, then why don't they treat their employees well?
Because
there's the most direct evidence I can think of.
Because when we're prescribing problems to society, we also have to be able to bring solutions to that, and we have to be able to demonstrate these solutions.
All right, so
that's
I want to go back to the
problem with this.
Your experiment thing.
Hold on, let Layman finish his point.
There wasn't really much. It's just like, it just seems like we attribute like a lot of problems to capitalism, but then there are solutions to that. There's like a bunch of solutions to problems like income inequality and all this stuff that like you can solve through like policies and stuff like that. I don't know why we have to completely infer causality.
There are easy solutions. Burden of evidence, though.
Yeah. There are easily solutions to all of these problems. And you're right, there's not the same burden of evidence going on here. I actually talked about that. We have plenty of food. We could give it to the hungry people. We have more than enough housing. We could give it to all the homeless people. But we won't, because the economic system disincentivizes that. It only incentivizes activity which is profitable. Any activity that is not profitable has to be either handled through charity, which is never enough to actually support it. It's a Band-Aid on a gushing wound. Or the people who engage in that activity have to take a major risk to their life and limb and the safety of themselves and those that they love to do something that is not profitable.
Do you guys think... Sorry, go on.
Yeah, it's more profitable to leave 40% of the food to rot than to give it to hungry people, even though it is more socially desirable to give it to the hungry people. And this is because the hungry people cannot pay for it. And there is no other way that they have found as of yet to generate a profit by feeding those hungry people who can't pay.
It just sounds like we're kind of viewing this as though we can either like private ownership, societies that are capitalist aren't homogenous insofar as their market deregulation goes for these things. Like, we have social security that spans across a spectrum, across capitalist societies that have been able to deal with problems like homelessness and stuff like that. Like, again, like if you look at places like Finland is a capitalist society. And Finland has like nobody on their streets now almost.
Yeah, well, the Nordic countries are very good at that, and that's a big part of their culture. Like if you look at Iceland in like the year 1200, they had more aggressive welfare laws in Iceland in like the year 1200 than we have in the United States right now, and it's because 6 months of darkness. So they have a huge issue with depression as a result of that darkness, and also it gets so cold, you've got a bunch of homeless sickles on the street if you don't deal with that. So they know the cost of leaving these people to die. The Americans don't know the cost of leaving these people to die because it takes longer and we've got a larger country and they get shipped off to California.
But we're not just talking about we're not just talking about America, we're talking about capitalism.
Yeah. But the fact is that so there are certain societies that have higher levels, like the state can be used to mitigate the market failures of capitalism. The problem is that you have this inherent contradiction between the power that is vested in the capitalist class and the state that goes out of its way to mitigate these problems. So the people that have all the power have a disincentive to solve the problems unless those problems then impact their profits or their quality of life. So again,
how do you think a policymaker wins/keeps their seat?
Wins/keeps their seat?
Yes.
As soon as a politician gets elected, they start fundraising. That's the answer.
Right? Why do you?
That's what they spend most of their time doing.
Why do you think they're fundraising? Where do you think that money is used?
Because you have to buy your seat in office in most capitalist countries.
What do you mean by buy your seat?
Well, I used to work in campaign marketing, essentially, in campaign communications, and it cost a shitload of money to get somebody elected. And one of the biggest indicators of who will win, like in a local election, is who spends the most money on things like robocalls, television advertising, street signs. That's what gets people elected under a capitalist hegemony.
Right.
You have to build an institution to push yourself into power, essentially. You need, and that's
only getting worse with things like super PACs.
The common thread here to keep in mind is that this money goes ultimately towards getting votes, towards getting exposure, towards getting people aware of the politicians and invested in their idea, right? So when we talk about whatever influence like corporations may play in getting like somebody elected and into office, ultimately the power here is not residing with the corporation, it's residing with the electorate, because that money is being put towards getting votes.
But you just pointed out that the electorate is ignorant and purposefully kept ignorant and purposefully fooled by these advertising campaigns. They're playing both sides.
Soft power is power. And to deny that is to me absurd, because I worked in marketing for so long, and that was basically my bread and butter, was applying soft power and propaganda to people to make them buy soap or what the fuck ever. So to say that soft power is not a form of power to me is absurd. And to say that money is not a form of soft power within the capitalist hegemony, within the capitalist imperialist framework is to me absurd. So, and then that begs the question, is it okay for capitalists to accumulate so much wealth that 8 individuals own half of the world's wealth? And if that's not okay, how do you have a system of capitalism in which you can distribute things much, much more equitably? And at that point, if you're redistributing wealth on such a massive scale, why not have democracy in the workplace? And what is your argument against democracy in the workplace? If you want democracy to control who gets to own nuclear missiles or who gets to send soldiers off to die in a war, you want democracy there with the state. Why don't you want democracy at the place where you spend?
We never said we don't want democracy in the workplace. The opposition is that it is twofold. It's that one.
What's this debate about again?
It's that one, worker co-ops like can absolutely work in certain industries, but that they aren't really feasible in capital intensive industries. And in all industries, it is beneficial for worker co-ops to form out of conventional firm transitioning, right? So the argument here
is such a weirdly specific thing,
but that
because that's how economists have to study these different things and how we have to measure all these different things.
Hold on. Okay. All right, let Splinters finish his point.
Ultimately, it's just like worker co-ops work fine in certain areas. They don't work fine in other areas, such that ultimately it's not a good idea to abolish like private ownership of capital. You need to have some level of private ownership of capital here. You need to allow conventional firms to exist to some meaningful degree in order to deal with capital intensive industries and to help worker co-ops in non-capital intensive industries have the greatest chance of like succeeding and surviving.
Okay, I think I can.
Okay, I'm not an economist, but I'm a former business person, and I have run many businesses, and I know that the main reason businesses fail is undercapitalization. You don't have enough money to start your business. You need at least enough money, most people say, to run your business for 6 months at a loss. That's a shitload of money. Okay, that's why the average small business that has any hope of succeeding in the USA requires at least $30,000 in startup, which is a significant amount of money for most workers. Now, the fact that you're saying that these privately capitalized firms that then turn into co-ops work better in these capital and heavy industries, that is like that's like saying like, okay, we have this greenhouse where we have potatoes and tomatoes and we're watering the potatoes but not the tomatoes, therefore we know that potatoes grow better, so potatoes are better. Like, that doesn't make any sense. We're not arguing just for cooperative own businesses within capitalism, because I know as a former business owner that most co-ops are not going to be able to start up with these capital intensive industries, because you're not going to be able to find 50 workers that can raise enough capital to support a business that's going to support 50 workers in the first year under capitalism. That's why we as communists and anarchists advocate for seizing the capital and seizing the means of production directly from capitalists. And if you want to just regardless of whether or not you think that that's moral or whatever, do you not agree that like if we could somehow just transfer the billions and billions of dollars from those 8 people that own 50% of the wealth into workers' cooperatives, would that not perhaps, from an economic standpoint, solve this problem of undercapitalization? And if not, why not?
My position is I don't know. My position isn't yes or no, because this is why I'm asking for like, this is why like we're sort of, it feels like we're pushing.
You want the
I think we either have a concession or
take a crack at that question. Can I take a crack at that question?
Yeah, go for it. And then I have a.
So, like, it is absolutely. I mean, well, technically, you're right. Yeah, if we were to seize all of this capital and like give it to any worker co-op that wanted to start, that would solve the undercapitalization problem here. The problem you run into now is you're operating like you're foregoing markets and operating under a command economy, because the state now has to decide.
You're talking to two anarchists. Neither of us are suggesting we abolish private property in the state. Neither of us
who is going to. But then, how are you deciding then which worker co-ops get these resources that you've now?
The workers just seize their own workplace. If you work at McDonald's, you're a McDonald's owner now. Then you build
and of how are new worker co-ops supposed to capitalize themselves? Because
we're talking about
you don't need to capitalize
radically
them
changing
outside
society.
of a capitalist thing. You're essentially asking, what you're saying is like, show us how socialism grows out of capitalism exponentially by playing by the rules of capitalism that were written by capitalists. Capitalism will never abolish itself. Like that, it's ridiculous. Now, the thing is that what I want you guys to look at, and you've talked about an experiment that you want to see. And there's a lot of really great things to see. I would recommend looking into the history of the Spanish anarchists during the Spanish Civil War, particularly the first 3 years, where the entire city of Barcelona was collectivized and run on an anarcho-syndicalist model. Not only were they responsible for the only civilian defeat of a modern mechanized military force in human history, but again, it resulted in a huge economic boom and continued until they were sadly betrayed by the Bolsheviks. And then the Bolsheviks, went around to promptly losing the war. You can also take a look at, there's a great documentary by Naomi Klein called The Take. And this is one of the things that convinced me to be an anarchist. And this is, you can look into the recovered factories movement in Argentina. Where a crisis of capitalism, and I won't get into it too much for this debate, led to the government freezing all of their resources because the capitalist owners were saying these factories, these businesses are not profitable, so we're going to shut them down, put everybody out of work, and we're going to sell them off for parts. And what happened was the workers instead said, we've got families to feed. They broke into the factories, they ran it themselves with no bosses, and it worked great. And the capitalists were unable to regain control of those factories. Again, what we're talking about here, when we talk about expropriation, we're talking about getting into a position where the state will no longer defend Jeff Bezos's claim of ownership over Amazon. What happens when the state doesn't defend that? What happens when Jeff Bezos goes to Amazon and says, hey, Amazon, give me my money since I own this? And everybody at Amazon goes, oh, Jeff, I think we've given you a lot of money and we don't really like you that much and you're not really doing a lot around here. So screw off. We're just going to do what we want with it. And Jeff Bezos, under our laws now, Jeff Bezos could go, oh, I'm going to go get the police. I'm going to throw these people out. No, let's imagine that the police, for whatever reason, aren't deployed, either because they do not exist, anarchist, or because the state decides that it's not going to enforce that ownership. Right there, the property naturally falls directly into the hands of the people who already have it, who already possess it. That's one of the ways that we can see this moving from capitalism to socialism. There are a number of other ways, and there's socially democratic ways to do it. There's odd Marx-Leninist ways. But the fact is that what you're talking about, where you need capitalism to build socialism, is the basis of Marx-Leninist thinking. Like all of these, the whole point was always to take the factories from the capitalists. To take control of the actual wealth.
To make sure I understand this, you're essentially saying that you dodge this problem of worker co-ops potentially not working in capital-intensive industries because every capital-intensive industry, you would just have the workers take control of that industry themselves,
correct.
Right?
Direct control.
That does not answer my question of how do new industries start afterwards?
So that would depend. It could happen a number of ways. You could have a form of market socialism where the workers themselves would crowdfund essentially when they think that there's a new cool idea. Once again, my comic book right now is being crowdfunded. It's incredible, like how much you can actually draw. And that's from people who are just interested in this kind of thing. So if you imagine we've got some really cool new industries and things that people want to happen, you could see crowdfunding happen because, again, once these workers own the means of production, they will have an ability to actually produce and control real wealth. And that will translate into an ability to fund other ventures. And that would be a kind of...
I just want to say a couple things here real quick. First of all, I think that, again, the framing of this is a little bit odd because it's like, and this always happens with these debates, is that the socialists have to brick by imaginary brick build an imaginary society that doesn't exist right now. Although there are, like Brenton was talking about, socialist examples like Anarchist Catalonia was a great example of success in the past. But regardless, it's kind of like a little bit unfair for us to have to build this imaginary example of how socialism could work flawlessly and build this big imaginary governance system when capitalism currently right now is not functioning well for the vast majority of people on the planet Earth. So I just want to see your thought experiments, and I want to see your ideas about how we could imaginarily make capitalism function, because the fact is it's not functioning right now. I want to correct something I said earlier. I said that the capitalists own 50% of the world's wealth. I misspoke. That was just me, frankly, just misspeaking. They own the same amount as 50% of the world's workers, which is still completely egregious in my mind, and evidence that capitalism is not currently working for the vast majority of human beings.
I'm going to jump in here just really quick. I want to give the capitalist side a little bit of time to respond to your question, because there has been a lot of A lot of
Well, yeah, we have to
businesses.
build a
I
whole imaginary
understand.
society, so it takes time to do that. But okay,
I get that. So go ahead and respond.
Wanna go first, Layman? Or do you want me to?
What was the question again?
There was a
I
lot.
just-
I feel like.
Yeah, there's so much.
I think
like,
my question would be, what can you build the imaginary society where capitalism functions for the majority of people on Earth, like where most people are not suffering the way that they are right now?
Well,
Can you give me your thought experiment.
Well, I don't really have an imaginary society built in my head, and that's kind of my point.
Then why do we
right?
need
It's like-
one? I just don't get
Well,
the
because
framing.
because this society that you guys want hasn't. I mean, you said there was an experiment, right? So it's like, okay, what was it, Barcelona or?
So
Catalonia.
you've got Anarchist
But that's just-
Catalonia, Revolutionary Catalonia is one.
That
Okay.
was in the 30s.
So-
It's not really relevant to today's material conditions, but okay.
It's impressive still. I like it. It's
I just
It is.
don't see what else we
Or
do.
the Soviet Union putting people, like going from an agrarian society in 1917 to putting people in space first 30 years later. I think that,
Yeah,
I mean,
but I
I'm
don't
not even a
think-
Marxist-Leninist, but I think that's pretty
I
impressive.
don't think. Yeah, I just don't think we want to be in a position where we're defending the Soviet Union, right? 'Cause-
They built, well,
Like, I don't think
you're talking
you
about how
guys
do you
would
build
wanna do
industry
that.
without capital. I'm sorry if you don't like the Soviet Union. I'm not a big fan of the Soviet Union either, since I'm an anarchist, but you asked, how can you build industry without capital? They built a space program.
Trenton
A
asked
bunch of
that.
farmers built a space
Not me.
program.
I'm sorry.
Okay, but I'm saying this, that the Soviet Union built a space program. They went from being farmers to having a space program faster than capitalists did. And the capitalists had a much better starting position.
We don't
So
have to get into
you
Soviet
asked
Union
how
stuff.
that
This is a
happens.
whole nother line. 'Cause,
Yeah,
like,
Well, okay,
Look,
because
I would
so
love
that's a
to fight
concession,
that
because
because I
did
don't
happen.
think it's. I mean, do we want to go into it? Because
Well,
there are
we don't
plenty-
have to
Yeah,
use the
I-
USSR.
yeah.
Okay, so hang on. I had a couple of
I just
specific examples you can look at.
1
They
second.
built
I
an
just
industry.
want
You don't have to
them to
like
be
them
able
to
to
say that it's.
finish their
I mean, this is
point.
ridiculous. This is like a taboo or something. They did build industry without capital, whether you like them or not, whether you like the way they did it or not. The question that the opponents asked was, how do you build industry if you don't have capital? And that's what they did. Now, we could say whether that's a good way to do it or a bad way to do it or whatever. By the way, people built industries before capitalism ever existed. If you really want a great example, look at all of human history before capitalism existed. They built things. They
I
developed
guess
science.
what I'm
They
just
had
asking
technology.
Is I just want to answer the last question before I get into
Yeah.
this argument. Is really all I'm
go on,
asking
Trent.
for.
Go on.
Okay. Oh God, I have to remember what it was now. All right, you're asked to build like the imaginary like perfect capitalist society, right? I think was what it was.
Yeah.
Okay.
Whatever you're
like-
asking us to do with the experiment, I want to see you do the same thing. I want you to meet your own standard.
Yeah,
That's all I'm
sure.
saying.
So like be clear, like I'm trying. I really am like trying not to make the burden of proof here like too like counterweighted. The problem is that there's a fine line to walk here between asking you guys to participate in an argument where like the absolute empirical experiment isn't there versus like capitalists having to defend capitalism, which has existed in many forms for all this time and has many different flaws, versus like this more theoretical socialism that kind of gets to get away with not having as much empirical stuff on it, so we don't get to see all the nuanced real world flaws that we otherwise
Yeah,
would.
but
right? So
I
that's
mean,
line I'm
the
trying to
peasants,
walk.
medieval peasants could have had this exact same argument before the rise of capitalism. I mean, just it's biased towards the
medieval
point in history
peasants-
where we're at.
Yeah, but medieval peasants
Wait,
didn't have the
I'm gonna
resources
get
to
into
run
the
experiments and stuff. But go on, Trent.
No, they had like 1/3 of the year off.
So, like,
And
I don't-
let's go on, Trent.
Hold on.
I don't think I need to build an imaginary capitalist society because I think that right now capitalism is serving the vast majority of people the world over very well.
Okay, so
And one of the
heavily disagree.
major, I know, yeah, Emerican Justin said he had some data on this. Like, if you want to like drop that and have me look it over, that'd be great.
I can
One of
run it
the
through in like a couple
major
minutes if somebody wants to let me.
excellent examples of this is that one trend, one pattern that has held and is still holding to this day, like globally for the most part, we can look at individual exceptions, is that as workers' wages increase, their protections increase as well as time goes on, especially when we see underdeveloped countries transitioning into more developed countries. We see an increase in income get matched with an increase in labor protections. And this is what has happened over the past like 30, 40 years in a lot of Eastern Asia and a lot of like Northern and Southern Africa. Now, if we want to talk about maybe like right now, there's like some blips in the trends or something, I'm not super familiar, right, with that. If you have those, feel free.
Yeah.
But the pattern for the
That's
past
not
several
the point.
decades has been that.
The pattern is only
and
there.
we can see that these like capitalist like trade deals and interconnectivity that comes about from this like capitalist system, what you called imperialism, that this does have really good effects. In addition to the TPP example I mentioned earlier, when you brought up the fact that trade unions were like legalized in the past year, that was actually a consequence of the TPP. That's what made that happen. Right. So we can see that these capitalist frameworks, we can see this as a vehicle for exporting greater protections and greater welfare and prosperity. In the
I want to know where are you getting this information from?
This is from the Diplomat. Yes.
Why are we arguing about the
right
TPP exactly?
Because the TPP is a beautiful example of how countries operating with capitalist interests and largely driven by capitalist leaders can craft policies that serve all members, including like underdeveloped countries.
You know, another example that I will give you is the Zapatistas in Chiapas, who've been doing extremely well. And again, also like the Zapatistas, the whole movement came about because of the monstrous conditions forced upon them by NAFTA, the TPP of the 90s. So like, I really like, if we want to have a debate on the TPP, we can do that. But two things that I really want to get into here. The question that I want to ask you guys to do is, how do you solve the problem? You don't have to come up with a whole capitalist society. Take the capitalist society that we have right now, take the TPP, and give me a way how do you solve the problem that success in the market means the person rises both in terms of social clout and soft power, and also money and hard power, and how when you are successful in the market and when you attract more wealth and power to yourself, you gain the ability to either lobby or to run for office where you get to rewrite the rules to your liking. How do you solve that problem of those people who rise, you know, by their bootstraps or however you want to do that to the highest levels of our society, having different interests from the people who live in our society, from the vast majority of us? Like, specifically with regard to workers' protection, because they don't want to give us workers' protection. They don't want anything other than the maximum return for the minimum investment. So how do you solve that issue?
Do you want to take that, Layman, or do you want me to?
Just
You
let
go
me
first.
jump in really fast. I'm sorry. I know I'm doing this a
No
lot.
problem.
How do you guys feel about, since the socialists started off, if everyone's okay with it, the capitalists can answer these questions and finish up, and then we can get on to Q&A. Is that good?
Yeah,
with
sure.
everyone?
Yeah, that
Seems
sounds
fair to
good,
me.
yeah.
Okay.
All right, Trenton, you go first.
Yeah, so my answer to that, I guess, is like twofold. Like, one, I agree this happens to like some extent, but I take issue with some of the specific framing here, Brenton. I don't, because you are referring, at least to me, I might be misinterpreting you. It sounds to me like you are taking the private sector and that private world and the public sector and public officials and politics in its entirety, and you're acting as though these are the same market. I just do not believe that's true. I do not think the things selected for here are at all like that similar. I think this is evident through the numerous like prominent businessmen that have taken that shot at the election, at public office, especially in the last election, that like theoretically, like people like Bloomberg and Yang should have been selected for by the algorithm, but it's once they entered this alternate market that is public politics, that algorithm did not serve them well. The other, as far as like the other thing I want to mention on that is that
Bloomberg
I think
was mayor of New York for freaking 12 years and rewrote the city.
right,
Like,
and that
it served him really, really well. He just didn't get president.
By your logic, though, as successful as he was in the private world, he should have gone on even further,
He
right?
did go on even further.
I mean,
Like,
he
again,
got like no votes in the Democratic primary.
Well,
Like,
yeah,
what are
he
you
did
talking
again.
about?
Yeah, because he's got no charisma. But at the same
More
time,
capital was
right,
behind
which says that
Biden
these are
than
two
was
different
behind
markets that select for
Bloomberg.
different things. All right.
Yeah.
Well, anyways, the second thing I wanted to talk about was that I think that in terms of solving this problem or what existed this problem, I think the best way to do that is it has to be rooted in social movements and has been rooted in social movements. Namely, like we need to address this these ridiculous levels of voter apathy in America that we don't even see reflected in most other capitalist nations, right? And we've seen tangible progress on that in the past 2, 4, 6 years in America, and I think we need to keep that going forward. If we get higher turnout, if we get more educated voters, if we get people interested and invested in politics by doing things like this, right, which is really cool, then that's how we get people who are voting for politicians that aren't going to do some of the horrible things that you mentioned earlier in terms of like foreign policy and worker protections and whatnot. And I think to some extent the Democratic Party has been that. It's not as great as we'd like it to be, but the Democratic Party has to some extent always been in favor of increasing worker protections and things like that. So you, Layman, all you.
Yeah, I just think that last question was like very, very loaded. No disrespect, Brenton, but I just
could have probably phrased it better.
No worries. But it's just the only way that I know like how I can answer a question like that is just I don't understand why if we have problems with capitalism that we have to address it with replacing it with a worker ownership model. And that's kind of my problem. Is like usually when I go into discussions about this stuff and if I'm trying to find like, oh, how can we make society better or something like that, is just the average fucking dude living in society. I just try to see like, okay, well, here, can we measure this? Have people measured this? Let's see if this works. Let's see if this works. And then if this can be passed through policy, then let's do that. And if there's some horrible thing that nobody is addressing and nobody's exploring, then we exercise our freedom of speech to let people know, hey, we don't fucking like the system as it exists. Let's do something about it. And then perhaps that will influence how politicians respond to the public going forward and things like that. So that I just don't know how you completely replace like a global economic system, how that's more pragmatic and that's something like better that you could do when we don't even know if something like that could work. Then that, and I can just close on that and we can go to Q&A, I guess, because
current system is destroying the environment, though. Just point that out there. Global climate change, about 9 years left at best. So that's just a big problem.
I really applaud particularly Trenton Splinters on that. I think, I agree that a social movement that gets people involved in politics and gets them out, in the streets and puts pressure is a great idea. The problem is we tried that. It was called Occupy Wall Street, and Mayor Bloomberg released frickin' helicopters to prevent coverage from the air and marched in his frickin' troops, broke my friends' skulls, dragged them out of their beds in the middle of the night. Like, when we try to do that, they attack us. And that's why, I'm saying we have to do something about the state. That's why I'm an anarchist.
But you can also say, but I could also point to another example where we've been able to positively, express disdain towards something that perhaps we can attribute to profit motives that led to positive social change without overthrowing capitalism. Like, look at slavery, like the transatlantic slave trade. There was a civil war, which fucking sucked, but the
most destructive war in American history.
Well, I mean,
I guess we could do that again.
No, I don't want to do that again. But what I'm saying is that, if something gets that bad, the people tend to speak for themselves, and then we can do that. But it doesn't seem like, but it doesn't seem like that's happening.
It's happening. Did you not see the freaking street? How many protests?
10 to 15% of Americans were in the streets risking their lives during the COVID pandemic, and because of Black Lives, obviously, really, it was because of
that was because of racism,
the police state,
not because of capitalism.
It wasn't just because racism and capitalism, if you don't think that the police tied to each other.
Yeah. Oh God, I don't have time to go into that. But
we don't have time.
That's another topic.
I can't believe we have to leave off on that, but go on, Carissa. Let's go to Q&A.
Right.
Yeah.
Look, episodes 2 through 36 are on their way up.
I know. I feel like you guys could just have a podcast. Be like,
that might be fun.
I know.
Yeah. Oh, Jesus Christ. Let's.
All right, let's get to the question.
I'd be down.
I'd love to have you guys on the channel sometime. You're both very
I don't
smart.
think anyone wants to talk to me, though.
I love talking to you, EJ, and we need to do that Among Us stream soon.
I want to.
That's what we should do. Among Us stream.
I want it on the record that when I was in high school, it was college. I actually reached out to EJ, and he didn't answer me. All right, so
I never. It's not just you. I don't answer
you on their stuff.
I don't believe in the concept of an inbox. I apologize. Send me another email though. I'll check it. I check more frequently.
I emailed EJ for like 2 years.
Yeah, emails are bourgeois construct that I don't believe in.
Right.
I apologize. I didn't mean to.
So are we going into the Q&A?
Yes, we are. First one is from Cider and Port. They say, question for capitalists. Are you against the socialist programs / institutions in America right now, or the new ones such as healthcare?
Healthcare is not a socialist policy. The universal healthcare exists in many, many capitalist countries to great effect. So,
yeah.
And I'm in favor of universal healthcare. Like, again, as I said at the beginning, I don't intrinsically value profits and stuff like that, only insofar as, what positive effects you can get from society. And it seems like there's nothing intrinsic to it that leads to harmful outcomes. That's all. So.
Yeah, I largely agree with that. As far as like the opposition to like whatever socialist, groups or organizations in America, I wouldn't say I'm opposed to them. What's nice about like talking about this socialism stuff is that when it comes to socialism, my disagreements to socialism are more like, well, this isn't the best way we could do it, right? It's not like I'm talking to alt-right people and socialists are going to do some crazy demonstrable harm, okay? Like, when I'm arguing against socialism and against socialists, it's more like I'm fighting with my brother or something. So no, I'm not opposed to the socialist organizations. I think that America could use some Overton window shifting. I hope they continue to grow.
I'm opposed to the socialist organizations, but I'm just
like
opposed in general.
We have to do this in quotes, socialist organizations, because
Yeah,
they're not socialist organizations. That's
Right.
But screw all socialists who aren't me.
Next one is from Helianthus with $5. Thank you so much. They say, at Brenton, are capitalist and worker mutually exclusive?
No, but one person can be one or the other at a given point in time. The way I draw the distinction between a capitalist and a worker is, where does your primary income come from? If it comes from investment, from owning something like a rental property or a business or stock, then you're a capitalist. If your primary income comes from labor that you do, like you sell your labor to someone else in exchange for money, that means you're a worker.
Gotcha. All right. Next one is from Gabriel K. He says, Pfizer is a rotten capitalist company. Oh, the irony.
I mean, yeah.
That vaccine was developed in conjunction with 5 different entities, one of which is Vietnamese, if I'm not mistaken. So if that was supposed to be an own, then go Vietnam. Vietnam.
Yeah, I mean,
Vietnam, one party state. Yeah. Go on.
Yeah, I mean, capitalist countries can, capitalist businesses can still do good things. The
workers.
It's not like
the workers developed that vaccine, not the freaking shareholders, not the capitalists. The workers developed that vaccine. Yeah. So
gotcha.
I don't see that as a point.
All right, next one is from Con the Stoner Lynn. They say, for all, what do you think of mutualism or left-wing market anarchism and thinkers like Pierre Joseph Proudhon?
Proudhon.
I even know French.
I say it different every time, so that way I cover all my bases.
I wrote a sketch. Where the mutualist, like it's on my channel. It's called Anarcho, about 5 anarchists trying to run a pizza shop in post-revolutionary Brooklyn, and the mutualist mispronounces Proudhon exactly the way you did.
Oh no.
I'm a suburban lib dog. I don't even know what mutualism means. I'm sorry. Brenton and EJ can educate me on that sometime.
They also asked about groups like C4SS. I'm not sure what that is.
That's Society for Center for a Stateless Society. Why don't we let Layman go first, because I think you had something.
Yeah, I don't know much about the C4SS. I think I said that right.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know much about that, or what was his name? Pierre
Joseph Proudhon.
Okay.
First person to ever. He was part of like the French like parliament, and so like he was the first person to ever call himself a political anarchist.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know much about him. Mutual aid, though. I actually, from a virtue ethics perspective, really love the idea of people just out of their own voluntary goodness, their own voluntary altruistic virtue, providing resources to people who otherwise don't have that. I think it's it's probably my favorite leftist idea, if I was to pick one, is the mutual aid stuff. So yeah, for what little there are.
You want to take that?
Yeah, well, okay, I'll piggyback on that. For me, mutual aid is not just giving money for like charity, where it's like morally good to give people things that they don't have because you feel sorry for them. Mutual aid to me means you're contributing to the society because you know that you might one day need that benefit yourself. So if you're giving to a homeless shelter, it's because you know there's a chance that one day you might be homeless. If you're donating to people with disabilities, you know that every human being will either die or become disabled at some point in their life. So that to me is what distinguishes mutual aid from charity. It's basically like contributing to a system so that we all collectively benefit and the lifting tide rises all the boats. But as far as mutualism goes, just my personal opinion, I consider mutualists to be comrades, even though I don't think that markets are the most efficient way to distribute things. I would much rather live in a mutualist society than a capitalist society. So, and you know, if there was like a big mutualist revolution, I would support it, but it's just not my, favorite blend of tea, but yeah.
I just want to clarify too. I wasn't I completely
I wasn't trying
to
define your I wasn't like attacking you. I was just giving my that was like decoupled from what you said. So
because I think that the number one reason to give charity is with the assumption in mind that I ought to treat others as I expect it to be treated. Right. So if I'm giving to an organization that shelters the homeless, the idea is that if I was homeless someday, that would be reciprocated unto me. Yeah.
It makes the society better for everybody if they're not to be homeless people. It's not just
To be honest, human societies ran on those kinds of systems before the rise of the state. That's how we functioned for the vast majority of our history. Now, mutualism, like as an economic plan, you look at like the work of Benjamin Tucker and like Spooner with regard to stuff like I really do like the idea of like a commons where we can all go and you need specific tools, go get them from the commons. Like you've got like a library to lend tools or anything that you possibly could need there. I think it's a good system. I do consider them comrades, and I usually try to help ANCAPs realize that they're actually mutualists. They're actually very confused mutualists, or they're fascists. But I like it. C4SS, I really side-eye them hard. They've put out some good stuff, but they like caucus with some awful people sometimes. And I think some guy Spengler, who was a big writer for them a number of years ago, wrote about what if the child consents, and then wound up abusing his daughter. I side eye C4SS, but I don't hate them. Because again, they're not Spengler. It's just there's in the right libertarian influence on them is a little to me.
I thought Egon Spengler was an ANCAP.
He may have been an ANCAP who wrote. No. That's the thing. He wrote for C4SS, which there was
the Ghostbusters did.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry, that was not worth.
Yeah, that was funny. Well,
moving on.
Ghostbusters is a libertarian. It's libertarian propaganda.
So. It is.
Next question is from Con the Stoner Lynn again. They say capitalists look into Robert Owen and New Harmony.
Ooh. That's all I can say to that. Sounds good. I love reading stuff. I've actually like my best friend since I was 5 years old is a socialist. I actually think he likes your channel, NonCompete. So if he's jealous as fuck of me, that's it. But I actually read like a ton of fucking Karl Marx and Engels just so I could talk about it with him for a while. So I'm always down to like read that shit. It's interesting. So yeah.
Yeah,
that's fun. You should read The Conquest of Bread, because I think the only people on BreadTube who've actually read it are like me and EJ.
Is that where the name BreadTube comes from?
That is where the name
The Conquest of Bread?
Most people don't know that. Even
the origin story. That's incredible.
I'm learning straight facts today.
Yeah, Peter Kropotkin, Conquest of Bread.
Cool. Next one is from, again, from Con the Stoner. They say, New Harmony, Indiana is your example. You're welcome.
Okay.
Is that the capitalist? Is that where a bunch of libertarians like tried to start a city?
It may have been. I get all this stuff crossed up. People should also look into, by the way,
or is that a utopian?
Is the co-op wars? There's a great episode of a podcast called The Dollop.
Yeah. Sorry, I think this was a utopian.
One of the American utopian communities.
Yeah, the American, and by the way, Marx destroyed American utopianism. So if anybody's really interested in that, Marx talked about American utopianism a lot and explained exactly why. And Kropotkin as well, actually. Kropotkin also destroyed American utopianism. It was like a proto form of socialism, but it was really not socialism at all. But I guess that would be a rabbit hole we don't want to go down right now. But.
Yeah, it's so weird.
Next one is from Spart344. They say the kibbutz system failed miserably. Once they became capitalistic, the lives of those people living on the kibbutz improved.
Oh boy. EJ, you want to take that with the...
I'm not sure I follow. Can we get that read one more time?
Yeah. The kibbutz system failed miserably. Once they became capitalistic, the lives of those people living on the kibbutz improved.
Okay. I mean,
in Israel?
That's the czar. I mean, so that's not really like, I could go and cherry pick any kind of, that's cherry picking. I could go and find all kinds of situations where capitalism destroyed. Like, look at the way that Pinochet and the Chicago Boys completely ruined and rolled back all of the progress that Allende made in Chile. So I guess that's my response. If you're going to cherry pick,
by the way, Chile just overturned the Pinochet constitution democratically. Yeah. They threw that off hard, and it took a long time, but I'm so happy about it.
I mean, I could go on. Argentina is another example. There's lots of examples where, I mean, you could say that the French instituted capitalism under their colonial rule in Vietnam, and certainly the lives of Vietnamese people have improved since that French capitalist colonialist rule ended there. I mean, I could cherry pick countless examples, so I don't really feel that's a point to be made.
This was something
I don't know anything about the kibbutz system, but just even if that's true, it's like maybe the kibbutz system sucked. That's probably what happened. I don't know.
I think I mean, the kibbutz system is not something that I've looked deeply into. What I will say is there's plenty of counterexamples. So if it is indeed as crappy as you said it was, there's a number of reasons why it wouldn't necessarily be socialism. What I'd also like to point out is like, okay, so oftentimes when we talk about like people doing better or people doing worse, we measure them by the values that are generated by capitalist society. And this is one of the reasons why I inherently rejected what Splinter had said about like things getting better for people around the world. A good example might be Cambodia. And this was before Pol Pot. And it was actually worse. But Cambodia was a nation of peaceful Theravada Buddhists, and Westerners came and they found that these Theravada Buddhists, they worked 6 months out of the year and they rested 6 months out of the year and did whatever. And they introduced new Western methods to increase and double their crop yields. And the people just went and worked 3 months out of the year because their things had doubled. And the Westerners got mad. And we're like, no, you're supposed to go and earn this money and put this stuff out. So they began to institute like systems of currency that weren't really used and impose this Western capitalistic model. And this led to, before Pol Pot, huge like freaking riots where babies were torn in half. But with people's bare hands. Like it destabilized the country and destroyed their traditional way of life. And yeah, they were a little bit richer, but torn up babies. So you can always say that like, oh, people are doing better because they're making more money, but money isn't real. It is an intelligent system. It's a measure of wealth. What is actually real are resources plus labor plus intelligence. That's what is actually going to measure like how a person is doing better or worse.
I think Trenton wants to respond to that.
Go
for it, buddy.
Let's
just let the questions go. It's fine. Talk about it some other time.
All right.
All right. Next one
rematch
is actually for Brenton.
Yes.
It's from Raven Zero. They say, Brenton, how is your socialist economy? Hold on. How would your socialist economy help the common folk, especially the people that, or example is the people, I'm sorry, it's worded very strangely. I'm trying to figure out what they're trying to say. Example, the people that work on Walmart and the people work as heart surgeon?
Sure. Well, I can actually answer that because my father is a doctor and my uncle is a surgeon. I also, know plenty of people that work hourly jobs. The fact is that socialism, my socialism, would free these people up to do the actual work that they want to do. One of the worst things for doctors when they get involved with medicine is the business of medicine, rather than actually serving the people, because most doctors get into the field not to become ridiculously wealthy, because trust me, you if you want to be ridiculously wealthy, don't be a doctor. You'll get good money, but if you don't draw satisfaction from actually helping people, you'll probably kill yourself, because the doctors actually have very high suicide rates as well. Now, as far as somebody working at Walmart hourly, what will happen under my system of socialism is workers will control their workplace and how they do it. So the heart surgeons will be the ones making the important decisions about surgery, not hospital administrators. And similarly, when you're at Walmart, the people that actually work at Walmart will have a stake and will have control over their workplace and how they do things, when they stock the shelves, how much everybody gets paid. And the fact of the matter is that when you actually have real tangible control over what you're doing, when you are one, because you're the worker, you're the one actually doing the work, you know it better than anyone else could possibly know it. And two, you actually develop a lot more satisfaction from what you're doing, because you are taking your unique skills and you're putting them to work in a way that makes the world tangibly better for everyone, whether that means stocking the shelves at Walmart or doing heart surgery and saving somebody's life.
Gotcha. All right. We actually only have one more question. It's from Danny XX. He says, the Soviet government expropriated capital from the people.
No.
I would say, at which point are you talking about? Because the Soviet Union is very, very complicated and changed many, many times into many different sorts of entities. I mean, you could say, are you talking about in the 70s and 80s when they started to open up and have all those market reforms, which ultimately led to the downfall of the Soviet Union? Then I would say that's definitely true. I mean, it depends on where you're talking about. Are you talking about one of the satellite nations? Or are you talking about the core of the USSR itself? I mean, that's an oversimplification, but I think there's truth to it. So I would recognize the point, but with nuance, with the added point that you have to have nuance when talking about the USSR. It's very complicated.
I said no because the USSR, I mean, prior to the USSR, the Romanovs, it was a quasi-feudal country, and they took property from the nobility, not from the people.
Yeah, but I think 1917, that was definitely not true.
Yeah.
I also think that if you're a socialist, it's probably within your best interest to not defend a totalitarian society, just in general. Not speaking to you guys, but just in general, perhaps. Bringing up the USSR is probably not a good idea.
As a dialectical materialist, I don't essentialize things like that. There are things that the USSR did that were horrific, and there are things that they did where they had success, like going from an agrarian culture to a spacefaring society and faster than capitalism, and with when capitalism had a better starting point. I'm not a statist. I'm not a Marxist-Leninist, but I'm just saying, you could talk about the USSR. I don't believe that the USSR is a taboo. I think we can look at it, we can talk about it, we can examine it, and we can find truth in what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah. My only recommendation would be convert as many people as possible to that dialectic materialism before you bring up the USSR.
That's exactly what I try to do.
But you were talking about how more people need to learn to think critically, and that's key. I mean, you could.
That's why I said do this critically thinking thing first.
I think that the working class is capable of learning how to analyze situations. I'm not afraid.
I totally agree.
Talk about things like that.
Yeah, I would say I'm not a tanky. I'm not a tank commander. What I would say is that you could just as easily make the argument that how can you defend the imperialist fascist United States?
I don't defend that.
Yeah, but it's the same thing. We can talk. Sometimes some aspects of American democracy are really awesome, and
or Sweden.
Should be.
How can you defend the imperialist Sweden, which has left its workers in Russia who are migrant workers from the Middle East to doom under COVID? How can you defend those imperialist?
Well, Sweden is still thriving, right? And we can disavow that. There's room for nuance for Sweden. My point in saying that was my point in saying that though was that the USSR failed. It collapsed.
because of market reforms.
And I would say,
wait,
and I was,
Well,
I just wanted to say,
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of positive things with the USSR, because from what I understand, like Lenin, managed to like increase like wages and like universal healthcare and all that stuff. Something I hear a lot from tankies typically who defend these societies like in their totality and stuff is that like, oh, well, there was universal healthcare there was like wages there. It's like, it seems like there's other societies that we can
get
do
the
this
same
with
benefits from.
Yeah, so I find when people start bringing up like the USSR and like these like one party like authoritarian places, it just raises a ton of red flags, ton of hairs on the back of my neck,
I mean,
I don't blame you.
But
By
I mean,
the
like
way,
you're again, I think that I don't want to get into this is probably a whole other debate, and I don't want to get into the position where I'm seen as defending the USSR because I'm not. But even the idea that it's like totalitarian and one party rule and everything like that, there are definitely accounts where an American went to the Soviet Union in the 30s and talked about how he, as a worker in this little village, was able to actually go and vote and go to these council meetings that were very democratic. So, and that was at one point in the history of the USSR, and then later it became much more totalitarian, and then later the Khrushchev had reforms that made it more democratic. I mean, this was a long and very kind of heterogeneous history where the USSR was constantly undergoing changes. So
you got
like,
that,
I just don't think that
the USSR debate is on the horizon. Let's
oh, Jesus, no. I'd rather argue against the USSR, but I just don't want to essentialize or mischaracterize a very complicated subject. So
sounds good.
Yeah,
Well,
there's a lot of propaganda out there, like on both sides of the thing. Like the Black Book of Communism is complete bullcrap. There's a lot of stuff when you'll hear ANCAPs talk about like the various famines, for instance, in the Soviet Union and in China. And then if you look into the history of that, it goes down to like one jackass scientist named Lysenko who did not believe in he didn't believe in evolution.
He didn't believe in the theory of evolution because he said the theory of evolution was like the bourgeois. It's like a bourgeois controlling.
Well, no, he said it was fascist. But beyond that, like here's the thing: Lysenko was saying things that were convenient to people in power, in much the same way Steven Pinker says things that are convenient to people in power, and people in power were like, oh, let's boost this guy up, and they put him in charge of their agriculture program. His theories didn't work. They lied about it. Then freaking China heard about it, believed the propaganda, and you have the famines that happened during the Great Leap Forward. Like it came down to that one jackass being raised. So I think like a lot of the time is one of the things that we need to be careful about is we don't want to essentialize an entire country. And two, we want to see exactly what these problems are and where they come from, and maybe it's not a good idea to centralize power in a couple of hands because those people could be idiots.
All right.
And just speaking from a last really quick point, I live in Vietnam and I've seen so much misinformation about Vietnam that my interest is always just to find the truth. Okay. And like, there are things that Vietnam does really, really well. There's some things I have criticism of. I just don't like to like pretend that it's all an all or nothing kind of game. So that's why I bristle and push back.
And I'm totally fine with acknowledging nuance. I don't think that if somebody says like, oh, well, there's one thing the USSR did that was like kind of good. I don't think someone's like inherently like some crazy fucking like far left motherfucker who's just like totally off the deep end and whatever. I'm fine with doing that. It's just the problem is I would prefer to look at societies that are continuing to thrive where they do
but
these
they're very
sorts of same
violent
things.
Societies. Those societies that you'd say are thriving.
Well, every society is violent.
Hey guys,
every society that has ever existed has been violent.
I'm sorry, this is a great
human nature.
Great discussion. But I think Carissa's got something she wants to say.
I do. I think that we should definitely have you all on again. You guys are awesome. Thank you.
I'm down if anybody will tolerate me. Yeah.
Thank you
so much. I'm not a like debater and I don't do a lot of these. So I really am sorry. I know I was like emotional and that's like, if you have feels, then you lose the debate. So I'm sorry. And I'm sorry if I stepped on people. I'm not really so used to this format. So I just
you fucking SJW cuck over here. Non-compete.
Well, we'll definitely
can't compete with the facts.
Have to have you all on again, and thank you for taking the time out of all of your busy schedules. I know it was kind of hard to plan and coordinate, so thank you for that. And to the audience, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget that there is actually a debate tomorrow on theism, so be sure to tune into that and keep on sorting the reasonable from the unreasonable, and have a wonderful night.